Flowers on the ground, and a broken heart. Our loser of the moment has just been dumped. You look like Sun Jing-woo, but you're more broke than a truck, and you're weak. Stop looking for me, you scumbag. I just left the dungeon 5 minutes ago, and went to sell the loot. All the losers look at me with suspicion, since I'm just a minor. This guy comes up to me saying, "Stay away, you can't afford to pay for it and you stink like a truck." Boom. Look at my thick sword. Get your appraiser right now, I said. But that's when a tight pink dress shows up, and the guy ignores me to go negotiate with the fake fucking couple. His king. It's been a week since we broke up, and she recognizes me instantly. Her new slave asks if she knows me, but she nervously pretends that she doesn't. But as I said his name, and he is a secondary character who wants to be humiliated, he throws himself forward to break the sword he was going to sell. Len, his supposed legendary sword, breaks into pieces. And me, your sword is the real garbage. The bitch starts making fun of the cuckold. What the hell? Didn't you say the sword was worth a lot? Anger management is not his strong card. So he jumps up to hit me, but I dodge everything easily. Take a step to the side, and throw a sequence. But everything looks very slow for me. This guy is an E-rank minor then. So how is he dodging everything? He thinks I'm not Sokka, but my dark mana has the properties of rubber. And the bro went straight to kiss the floor. The tight-fitting dress is shocked, and I activate my web using this guy as a punching bag, while my ex runs and cries desperately. They both hit the wall like garbage. And the girl has just discovered the true meaning of gender equality in real time. But as an E-rank minor like myself, who was drowning in debt a few weeks ago, he managed to do it. His family died due to the mining of those loan sharks. He's working hard trying to wake up and pay off the debts, but life hasn't been easy. No way. But here we are entering another dungeon. His name is Lee Yi, and he risks his life to connect energy stones. "Hey dude, work hard and in 35 years, you are going to buy an apartment," says this ugly ninja. But our bro doesn't seem happy with this capitalist offer, even more so considering that those dungeon dimensions are deadly for anyone who enters. The old guys in the car are talking about Regio. Isn't that the loser whose parents died and left a crazy debt? Yeah, and he's never gonna pay for it because he's weak as a truck, thinks Lei. Sometimes people become weak, not because of themselves, but because the rules of society became crazy. I'm going to change my life. The moment he thinks that, the ground starts shaking. The old gang is completely confused and scared. "Shut up, guys, we're fine, there's no monster here." The bro couldn't even finish his words and was impaled. Everyone is in shock and the bro's legs are shaking. A lot of high-level monsters suddenly appear and now they are all against everyone. The bro tries to run away. He needs to get to the exit of the dimension, but he receives the impact of a human arrow and is crushed. Looking to the side, he sees the rest of the gang getting into the car and leaving it behind. But not for long. These monsters are not going to let a single ninja out of there. They jump forward. Everything explodes. Monsters and humans on fire. I notice that they are weak to fire, so I look at a torch next to me. The moment I think about grabbing her, a black-faced guy comes in to hit me. They almost tore me to pieces, but now at least I have a way to fight back. I'm sure I look ridiculous, but those damn monsters are holding their ground for now. I created an opening. All this had started 10 years ago when the doors first appeared. Dimensional creatures, insect-like horrors, demonic beasts emerged from them, and only awakened individuals could fight against them. That gave humanity a fighting chance to close the doors and usher in a new era of interdimensional exploration. The problem was that not everyone woke up. In our protagonist's group, there were only ordinary people. Taxpayers, bill payers, background characters in the grand scheme of things. And now the few survivors were desperately trying to hold burning debris as improvised weapons to protect themselves. One of the most nervous pointed out that it would not last much longer. That's when our protagonist mentioned the warehouse. There was still a lot of gasoline there. If they sealed the cave entrance with fire, they could survive long enough for a rescue to arrive. Showing strong leadership, he ordered everyone to form a circle for protection. They were able to advance towards the cave entrance while keeping the creatures at bay. Once they reached the gasoline barrels, our protagonist told them to pour the liquid at the entrance of the cave, and they obeyed immediately. One of the creatures directly stepped on the flammable trail, and our guy ordered the torches to be thrown. It wasn't long before the gasoline caught fire, spreading the flames across the area, and burning one of the monsters. Thanks to his quick thinking, one of the miners even praised him. Now that they were inside, they noticed that 5 of their companions had disappeared. However, the remaining miners seemed ready to follow his lead. The only problem was that this cave felt too mysterious for anyone to feel safe. Inside the cave, there is a very peculiar statue. One of the workers mentioned that she had been discovered a long time ago. and that the supervisor had originally planned to take her away and sell her on the black market. That's why they were there in the first place. Our protagonist noticed that the construction looked incredibly old, while the other workers were busy trying to contact the rescue. As soon as they managed to get a signal, they reported the attack and everything that had happened. Unfortunately, for the miners, help would only arrive in 2 hours. Until then, they would have to do whatever it takes to survive. When one of the miners begged for the rescue team to hurry up, he was completely ignored. He and his colleagues would have to stand up for themselves. Their first challenge was the limited power supply in their protective suits, which would only last about an hour and a half. After that, there wouldn't be much they could do. Our protagonist immediately checked the battery of his own suit, and saw that it still had a remaining 61% charge. In the midst of all the chaos, one of the miners caught everyone's attention. He said that not everyone was going to survive, and that in a situation like this sacrifices had to be made. He suggested killing the old man and the orphan, our protagonist, so that the batteries in his suits could be reused. Since no one was waiting for them outside anyway, they would be doing everyone a favor. Threatening our protagonist, he ordered him to surrender his battery. Then he started beating him with a wooden stick. Our guy was too weak to defend himself, and now he was crying completely indignantly. "I defend." Determined to speed things up, they began to tear the mask off his face, hoping that perhaps the radiation in that dimension would force him to wake up. Our protagonist crawled on the floor, gasping for air, and desperately trying to get his mask back. But for those bastards, the chance of him waking up was basically zero. And now they had another battery to keep them safe. After finishing with him, they began to look for other victims to torment. One of the miners pushed his colleagues towards those psychopaths, and then tried to run away. Before they could catch him, he managed to get into one of the vehicles. Once inside, he decided that if his life was going to end there, everyone would fall with him. He accelerated the truck immediately, which plunged the remaining miners into panic. If the truck broke through the wall of fire outside the cave, the creatures could enter. During the flight, the statue that had been loaded into the truck fell to the ground, landing right in front of our protagonist. As soon as he was alive, he thought that the statue was smiling at him. And damn, I was really smiling. A crazy, twisted smile. What the hell? That statue looked completely demonic. Maybe he was hallucinating from the radiation. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But one thing was for sure. That smile was eerily sinister, too creepy to ignore. At that moment, a creature managed to break into the cave and completely destroyed the statue. And now, that same creature from the first chapter we were talking about was about to end up with our protagonist, poor guy, suffering from radiation poisoning, and now about to be murdered. It was then that the monster dragged his hand down his stomach, and our guy remembered the moment when he became an orphan, completely abandoned by the few relatives he had left, none of whom wanted to have anything to do with him. He had been condemned to a miserable life, humiliated at every step. He even tried to investigate the death of his parents, but the corporation was too powerful. All those letters of complaint he wrote were useless. In the end, they just annoyed people instead of helping him get justice. In fact, for the owner of that company, it was our boy's parents who were to blame for their own deaths, because they were reckless and caused millions in damages. Poor guy, all our protagonist could do was cry, because he didn't have the strength to defend himself. Completely abandoned, he was being beaten by the Whisperers. After all, in their minds, the only good orphan is the one who pays an unpayable debt. As I was going through this completely unintentional massage session with those very unqualified chiropractors, our boy reflected. The only thing left for him now was to become an interdimensional miner. The only way I could repay the debt. After being brutally impaled, he decided to let his hatred burn to the 8th sense. He swore that he would fall fighting. On his deathbed, he bit the creature. At that point, being weak or not didn't matter anymore. What mattered was to do something, and apparently the bite worked, because it irritated the creature enough that it threw him to the ground. After that act of bravery, he realized that he no longer had the strength to do anything. But then, a sinister creature emerged from the shadows, probably the same one connected with that statue, noticed something in him. He had potential, but for our guy nothing made sense anymore. The statue was as weak as he was, and had been torn to pieces. The shadow entity, however, said that he could save him if he surrendered his body to her. Right now. But our protagonist had already suffered too much in life, and did not want to make another one of those ridiculous agreements. It would be better for him to die and finally have some peace. The company liked his determination. There he was, turning down such a tempting offer, even with almost no time to live left. But now the choice was no longer his. The shadow system was activated, and before the creature could crush him under his feet, he sensed that something was wrong. A dark and evil energy filled the air, forcing her to her knees. The shadow entity had taken control of our boy's body. His first act was to make that creature regret having broken the statue. A giant foot made of shadows descended and crushed the creature, in a gesture of pure revenge. After that, the other creatures got scared. But proving that they had the IQ of a fentanyl addict, one of them still decided to attack. Before he could even get close, a huge shadow creature appeared under his feet and swallowed the monster completely. There was nothing I could do. The shadow entity found the taste of that thing absolutely disgusting. Now fully restored, she turned her attention to those miserable miners. He wondered what would happen to our protagonist if he returned his body to its rightful owner. The flat earth, my friend, does not rotate. He turns around. The same miners who had just tried to kill our boy were now on their knees begging for their lives, saying they just wanted to survive. One of them even had the gall to say that if he hadn't ripped off our guy's mask earlier, he would have never woken up. So maybe I should be grateful. But for our guy, there was no such thing as gratitude towards a group of degenerates like them. That comment only made him even angrier. Still, he decided to knock the miners to the ground, and one of them begged him to leave everything behind. Our protagonist allowed them to flee, even offering to help them. He immediately used his shadows to rip the mask off the first of those bastards. Moments later, two of them were already fully exposed, and the radiation began to do its delicious little tricks. Now that two of the wretches had been eliminated, the remaining miners were terrified by what our protagonist was capable of doing. Walking towards those who had not been hostile from the beginning, he handed them the batteries taken from those he had just executed. The shadow entity spoke directly into our boy's ear, telling him that he should give up all that useless compassion, because it would only get him into trouble. Our guy told the entity to shut up, because he doesn't like taking orders from strangers. The entity replied that it was looking forward to seeing if he would still act like this when his life was on the line. Already outside the cave, he noticed that even more creatures had decided to join the party. And for the first time since he got his powers, our protagonist hesitated. That overwhelming amount could be a real problem. The shadow entity suggested that he surrender his body again, promising to eliminate those creatures in the blink of an eye. Now that he was living inside him, he noticed that his legs were shaking like bamboo swaying in the wind. It was time for me to use my head. Jumping straight into combat, our protagonist once again said that he does not like to take orders from anyone. Then the fight finally started. He moved with the agility of Spider-Man and the endurance of Superman. But the creatures were cunning. They were attacking from behind, biting, jumping, doing somersaults. And our guy noticed that his reflexes had become much sharper. The problem was that they were still dangerous. The shadow entity said that it was useless if it depended only on brute force. So he concentrated his strange power in one hand and hit one of the creatures with everything he had, telling the entity to shut up. That's when he finally realized how much stronger he had become. The problem was that the creature was still standing. All he wanted was for one of his hands to be holding a gun. The moment he thought about it, a dagger made of shadows appeared. Now our guy was about to become a real butcher of creatures. Using his new strength and agility, he managed to take down one of the enemies, which filled him with joy because he could finally finish off those hybrid monsters once and for all. It was at that moment that he fully understood that he had become an awakened one. But just when she got distracted, daydreaming like a 13-year-old girl, thinking that life is perfect, she received a blow from behind and immediately came back to reality, fighting back at the creature. That was his reminder that there were still many more to kill. Luckily, I had the strength to respond to every attack. After a few minutes, all the creatures were dead, and our guy was completely out of breath. He decided to lie down on the floor to get it back because that had been brutal. Finally, the system notified him that he had woken up. He was now an E rank. After that exciting adventure inside the portal, our guy was taken to the hospital. While he was under observation, the nurse said he was fine, as awakened individuals are usually in exceptional physical condition. The only question that remained was what rank he would end up in, and the doctor said that they would find out soon. He just had to wake up first. With that, the doctor told them to move on to the next patient. But judging by the nurse's expression, it was obvious that she wanted to spend some time alone with our protagonist. Apparently she was troublesome. While sleeping, the shadow creature was disappointed that the human it had possessed turned out to be only rank E. With the power she had, she expected at least S-class. Now she was trapped inside a weak body. Truly disappointing. When our boy finally woke up, he heard the voice of the entity, and asked why it kept bothering him. Filled with arrogance and pride, the entity told this foolish human to pay attention. His name was Shang. and he came from an ancient supreme race that ruled over all hells and dimensions. Now he ordered the boy to dedicate his body and become his herald. Our boy had never heard anything like it and thought that the creature must have made it all up just to deceive him. What he didn't realize was that the creature could read his thoughts and was quite offended by what he was thinking. He demanded that I give his body back to him, but our boy thought that it might be some kind of spiritual possession, or that his body would be stolen. Anyway, he thought it was better not to provoke that thing. She started going over all the possible ideas she could think of to get out of that situation, since losing her body was not an option. Every idea I had was completely absurd, which only made the entity even more irritated, until finally, it exploded all those thought bubbles in anger, and called him ridiculously naive. Frustrated, the creature realized that she had been terribly lucky to be linked to such a useless human. He opened a portal right there in the hospital room and threw our boy Guy to another dimension, telling him that he had 3 days to raise his rank, or he would be completely destroyed. When he got back to his feet, our guy noticed that he was in a completely different place, which was strange considering that he remembered being in a hospital room just a few moments before. The entity explained that this dimension belonged to him, and that was the challenge of the insect nest. Each awakened person could only pass through that place once. Our guy quickly understood what he had to do. In front of him appeared a huge hybrid insect with a thick armored shell. The entity told him that he now had access to his knowledge, and that he needed to get used to it. The shadow system looked like something really interesting. Without wasting any time, our boy used his shadow dagger. He was still surprised by the speed he had now, but even so, the demonic insect was furious, and was still very much alive. He dodged the attack, and detected a blind spot, determined to take advantage of it. He hit the shell of the creature, but it did absolutely nothing. He was thrown back by the monster's counterattack, and realized that his dagger was not going to pierce that armor. Observing all this, the entity was already getting irritated. He was not only weak, but also stupid, relying solely on brute strength. Ignoring the insults of the entity, our boy kept trying to solve things with violence, while the entity simply waited for him to beg for help. After several blows, the insect finally lost patience, and unleashed a devastating shockwave, throwing it all over the area. The entity tried to get him to react, and that's when Lee noticed something on his shoulder. It was the creature's blood. Somehow, he had really hurt his enemy. Now I finally knew what the monster's weak point was. Well, he had found the weak spot, but the insect was now completely enraged at him. Still, he decided he was going to kill that thing no matter what. That really surprised the entity. Seeing this weak and useless human suddenly used the power of the shadow sense. It was as if our protagonist had drunk from the source of the script's power. He was suddenly able to break through the monster's shell. With sarcasm, the entity commented that he had gone through all that trouble just to cut off one of the insect's legs. He was clearly meant to be a disgrace to his entire family. Our guy replied that hitting the weak points was much easier than the entity seemed to think. And apparently he hadn't even realized that before. Determined to finish the fight, our protagonist knew he needed a much better weapon, so this time, he summoned a shadow lance. In a matter of seconds, he was ready to bring suffering to the insect monster. He finally managed to get under the creature and deliver a devastating blow to its abdomen. Breathing hard, he realized that he had finally achieved the victory he so desired. Right next to him, the passive-aggressive entity only muttered that he had worked too hard to defeat something so weak. Right after that, our protagonist felt a strange power running through his body. The entity explained that it was an energy stone, capable of increasing the level of its ability. It wasn't long before our boy felt something approaching, which meant that that cave could become even more dangerous. The entity suggested that I use the sense of shadows to check the situation, but our boy had no idea what that was. The evil spirit told him that he needed to focus his senses and channel energy into his eyes to activate the ability. He finally managed to take control. His shadow sense was now at level 1. Through it he saw that at the end of one of the corridors there was another insect, and at that very moment I was about to attack him. Luckily, he dodged each of the projectiles, and after seeing the destruction they caused, he realized that they were probably poisoned. Now he had to avoid every attack, which irritated him greatly. Even with his senses sharper than ever, the attacks also came from behind. But thanks to the plot-driven impulse he had received, he dodged them all. Feeling the pressure, he told the entity that such a sense of shadows seemed useless. And the evil spirit replied that the problem was not the ability, it was him. The skill was incredible. He was just weak. That insult angered our guy. He decided to gather more energy by finishing off those monsters. The truth is that the passive-aggressive spirit was impressed that an E-rank awakened one could control such an ability so easily. Things were getting more and more interesting. Using his overflowing senses, he now had the vision of a predator lurking in the forest, watching each of his enemies. Thanks to that, he realized how terribly outnumbered he was, which made him nervous. The spirit, on the other hand, was hoping to see some determination on his part. In a matter of seconds, all the insects rushed directly at him. The entity noticed that our boy had found a perfect position on the battlefield, which meant that maybe he could resist a little longer. Clearly losing his patience, our guy let all his energy explode outward, cutting into pieces the enemies charging at him. The evil entity realized that he had just unlocked the second stage of the shadow sense. A pleasant surprise for her, considering that the guy considered weak. Now he was using ridiculous skills. Although more enemies kept coming, our guy noticed that the insects seemed to be moving slower and slower, not realizing that it was actually he who was moving faster. With his heightened senses, he could now see bright points of light on his enemies' bodies, showing him exactly where their points were. The passive-aggressive entity explained that once his ability identified the weak points, his attacks could break through any defense. Driving his daggers into the ground, Lee caused several shadow spikes to emerge and impale each of the insects. Thanks to all this, he absorbed multiple energy stones, further increasing his dominance. Now that I could see every weak point clearly, finishing the job became easier and easier. Our guy lashed out at the swarm of arthropods, proving to be much more effective than any pesticide. Suddenly he had to dodge. One of the insects was so fast that it almost tore off his head. He quickly realized that this beetle was completely different from the others. To respond, he transformed his dagger into a whip, surprising even the evil entity. Now that he had a new weapon, our guy managed to catch that damn beetle, and in a matter of seconds, he ripped off its head cleanly. All while he was still being attacked by the other insects, determined to end his life prematurely. And our guy was more than happy to grant them their wish, opening the bellies of each and every one of those stupid arthropods. As he absorbed more and more energy stones, the competence of his skill kept increasing. With the huge amount of enemies coming at him, our guy might even rank up. Observing all this, the entity was starting to look a little more optimistic. Maybe this useless human really had some potential. He could see that his dominance over the shadows was growing rapidly, which was good news. The downside, however, was that using those shadow techniques was consuming an enormous amount of mental energy. A price he would have to pay. In the middle of the fight, our protagonist noticed that his vision was starting to become blurred. Nothing good. While trying to catch his breath, he was hit from behind by one of the arthropods that seemed eager to take a bite out of him. After receiving that blow, our boy was determined not to die in that cave. He only had 15 minutes left. To motivate himself, he reminded all the miserable people who were waiting for him in the real world. In his mind, he was sure that his parents' death had been unjust, so he had to take revenge on at least half a dozen of those bastards. As time passed, he continued to slaughter the arthropods furiously, pushing his progress higher and higher, until finally, the only thing left on the ground were the mangled remains of those arrogant insects. Our guy sat on a throne made of corpses, deciding on only one thing: to make each and every person, whoever looked over his shoulder at him, beg for forgiveness. The dark entity realized that human hatred was extremely compatible with the abilities of the shadows, which explained why the boy had so much potential. But then she reminded him that his time was running out. I needed to move up the ranks immediately. Maybe he was already trying to channel all his energy for one last attack. And that was exactly what I was planning to do. Summoning the full power of his shadows, and with only 2 seconds remaining, he was ready to unleash a devastating blow against the oncoming insects. But did it work? We found out right away. Or because just before time ran out, he still hadn't hit any of those creatures. Fortunately, thanks to the power of the script armor, with only 1 second remaining, he killed enough to move up to D rank. Completely out of breath after the battle, and having pushed himself to the limit, he even received a passive-aggressive greeting from the dark entity. Looking at the remains of the battlefield, he saw a broken sword. The entity explained that that training ground had been used by his tribe in the past, and that by human classification standards, that weapon was at least rank A. But when picking it up, our guy realized that it was not a dagger at all. It was the size of a door. The entity assured him that, compared to his shadow abilities, those abandoned weapons were worthless. Still, our guy decided to collect them all, thinking that they might be useful one day. That left the entity curious, and our guy admitted that he did not hate capitalism as much as he said, "I was going to sell them later." Only awakened individuals of rank D or higher are allowed to sell equipment. So now I needed to register. When he arrived at the awakened registration building, he was furious to find that they still had him listed as rank E. The secretary told our guy that his attributes were actually very good, but they could not detect any energy fluctuations. Reason why I could only register it as E rank. On the bright side, since he was already registered there as a minor, he would receive a 15% salary increase. Outside, our guy admitted to himself that the shadow system really was amazing. And the entity told him that human perception was too limited to understand his true potential. Now our guy realized that he could use that to his advantage. The problem was that selling all those weapons and tools was going to be complicated. His only option now was the black market. To the entity, that sounded like a very interesting way of life. When he got there, the usual black market suspects noticed him immediately. His clothes made him look like an ordinary nobody. The entity, absorbing the atmosphere, commented that humans were clowns, gathering a few magic stones and fitting them into mediocre weapons, thinking that they had created something amazing. He even felt sorry for our guy for being among them. One of the thugs hanging around decided to ask what a miner was doing in a place like that, and then tried to kick him out. Our guy decided to keep his pride, and asked if this is how they treat customers there. Only then did he reveal the artifact he had brought, showing the dagger, which was actually a sword made for someone at least 10 meters tall. The people around him were shocked, and a suspicious-looking couple approached him. The girl was clearly not happy about being dragged away to that filthy place. The man accompanying her was a D rank awakened, while she was just a background character. The merchant immediately recognized the man as a very important customer and decided to treat him well, since the money was sent in that place. Upon inspecting the sword that our boy had brought, the merchant saw that it had an attack bonus, perfect for awakened fighters of rank D. It was then that our protagonist heard the man's name, Jin, and realized that he actually knew him, or rather, he recognized the woman. I remember, after he became an orphan, she had abandoned him too, because all he had left were debts and nothing of money. The girl had gone off to find someone who could at least pay her bills. The other woke up, surprised, asked if they knew each other. The girl lied that she didn't hang out with lower-class people. After that, the merchant began to treat our guy worse and worse, as he was being too familiar with a customer's wife. Important. That same client decided to intimidate our protagonist, ready to hit him with his sword, the one with the attack bonus, to show who was in charge. He threw a slash at him, but our guy hid behind the huge sword he had brought to sell, and the artifact was so solid that the attacker's gleaming sword shattered inconveniently. Our guy told him that the real garbage in that market was the gun that idiot was holding. The girl who had seen everything did not understand what had happened and began to scold her boyfriend, saying that he had told her that sword was powerful, so he shouldn't have been humiliated like that. Now, after losing his expensive gun and being humiliated in front of his girlfriend, the furious hunter, pushed to the limit by his reproaches, launched himself against our protagonist. Poor guy, our guy noticed that idiot was actually slower than the bugs he had fought against. And yet, confident, the attacker praised his reflexes, thinking that maybe it had just been luck. He then launched a flurry of attacks, but each and every one of them failed miserably. Our guy realized that the attacks really were pathetic. The same insects he had defeated before would have been ashamed to fight someone so weak. On the other side, the other awakened fighter was getting more and more furious, convinced that he was only facing a poor orphaned and indebted miner with nothing to his name. That only made him angrier. No matter how much force he put into his punches, he still couldn't hit a single attack against our protagonist. Finally, our guy ran out of patience. He uses his shadows to tie the idiot's fist, preventing him from moving at will. With a sadistic look in his eyes, our protagonist decided it was time to put those extras in their place. He immediately pulled his shadow whip, slamming the guy to the ground like he was a garbage bag. Humiliated once again, the man tried to get up slowly, helped by his girlfriend character in the background. To our guy, the guy now looked like a dog on a leash, because that's exactly what he was, tied by a shadow collar. But even while he was being humiliated in such a brutal way, the fool decided to pose as an even bigger asshole, charging at our guy again, determined to take his life. Before he could even get close, someone very powerful from the black market appeared, ordering them to stop the fight immediately. This man didn't like what he was seeing. Even if that fool was a loyal customer, he did not tolerate problems in his store. The name of this mafia boss was Wang, and he was also a D-rank awakened. The girl who had abandoned our protagonist intervened, and said that damn miner had insulted her boyfriend and broken his sword. That's why he had been attacked. That immediately piqued the chief's curiosity, as he was now face to face with a minor. Something hard to believe. I wanted to know if the sword that our guy was holding was really capable of breaking a weapon of that quality. Our protagonist made it clear that he had only been defending himself. The idiot's sword broke during the attack, and that wasn't his fault. Then the boss asked his loyal customer if that was true. But apparently the two of them knew each other well enough to start whispering something shady, clearly planning to set up a trap for our protagonist. Before that, however, the boss tried to act as a mediator, and said that he would handle the situation fairly. Approaching politely, he asked to inspect the sword just for a moment. In a few seconds, he was completely shocked. With all his strength, he could barely hold her. He had to weigh hundreds of kilos. Now she wondered how this poor orphan miner, in debt and supposedly useless, was able to wield it so easily. Curious, he asked how someone so mediocre had achieved something so valuable. But our guy, full of confidence, asked since when the black market cared about the origin of the objects that were brought. The boss realized that he couldn't fool him, and said that he was just curious. So our protagonist decided to play along too, revealing that he had found the sword while mining. That convinced the boss that our guy really was just a miner. He said that the sword was strong and sturdy, although it had no enchantments, which meant that it was not worth much, unlike his loyal customer's sword that had been worth millions. And with that he made what he called a very fair and friendly offer. Since our guy was just a miner, he would buy that piece of garbage for a fair price, to compensate for the financial loss his client had suffered, suggesting that our protagonist should see it as an act of charity. After listening to that offer, the loyal customer agreed, immediately telling our protagonist that he would forgive him the debt. But right after that he turned to his girlfriend, and said that if the idiot didn't accept the deal, they would sell his organs for at least 2 million. It was then that our protagonist realized that he was walking straight into a trap. They had planned it all while pretending to negotiate. Now that everyone was guilty, it was time for him to have some real fun. And by unleashing the power of his shadows right there on the black market, he made it clear that it was not he who should be worried. The mafia boss's bodyguards began to advance towards him, ready to finish him off. Wang confidently told his loyal customer that the fight was already over, and suggested going to a more private place to discuss the proceeds of the future sale. But what he didn't expect was to see one of his own men flying in front of him, like a sack of potatoes. Looking back, he became worried. His bodyguards were being beaten senseless. All I could see was our protagonist kicking those extras like they were footballs. One of them was even thrown towards the loyal customer, who showed his D-rank strength, dodging him, and violently kicking the poor man's body to the side. Now that our boy had gotten rid of those useless guards, it was time to face the real enemies. Increasingly worried, his ex-girlfriend wondered when that miner had learned to move like that, while her boyfriend was eager to defeat him. Charging at him once more, he shouted that against the D-rank awakened, our protagonist was nothing, a nobody. But before he could even get close, our guy covered one of his hands with shadow power and slapped his enemy hard, injuring him in the process. That only infuriated the spoiled child even more. Even his father had never beaten him. And now another man had slapped her in the face. Now he was completely determined to take our protagonist's life, throwing several energy beams at him. But none could get through his defenses. Only then did the fool realize that his skills were useless against him. Our guy calmly walked up to them, ready to teach them a lesson, and his ex-girlfriend began to panic. Before they could even react, they were completely trapped in shadow nets. One of our boy's skills. Immobilized, the fool began to think that our protagonist should be at least C rank, maybe even B rank. But Lee made sure to tell them that he was only a rank E awakened, officially registered as a minor. Raising one of his hands, now glowing with shadow energy, he was about to slap his rival once more. Before the blow fell, the brat tried to defend himself, saying that he was connected with important whisperers. Unfortunately for him, those were the same whisperers who were trying to make our protagonist pay an impossible debt, which only made him even angrier. Then he began to slap the fool mercilessly. After that humiliating beating, she kicked him away, also hitting his ex-girlfriend backwards. The one who had tried to kill him had just been humiliated once more. For our guy, that kind of scum, those who work with loan sharks, are exactly the people he despises the most. After saying this, he was almost hit by an attack from behind, launched by Wang himself. But our protagonist only fulminated him with his gaze, releasing all the power he had been containing. That was enough to terrify everyone in the room. Faced with the situation, the poor fool who had just been beaten by our protagonist was willing to offer money to be forgiven. But our guy didn't like the offer. She was too small. So he decided to beat him a little more. He told her he would be completely forgiven after receiving 50 slaps. Only then the desperate guy offered his black card, saying that there must be 5 million Korean gwons on it, enough to calm him down. Our boy immediately realized that this money should have been collected by extorting innocent people, just as it had been done to his parents. And that only made him even angrier. Dropping the guy's body on the ground, our protagonist said that this money was nothing more than legitimate compensation. After being extorted by loan sharks, he finally let the couple back into their lives. Mediocre, since that humiliation session had been intense enough. Furious, the man slapped his girlfriend in the face, blaming her for convincing him that our protagonist was just a minor. Now he wanted revenge, because money is not something that is easily replaced, and he was willing to do whatever it took to do. Let the protagonist pay. He called a very violent man, the one who was in charge of all the whispers, who was already aware of what had happened. Someone had stolen money from one of his subordinates. Now that he knew, he told all his men that they had a very interesting mission to carry out. They could eliminate everyone who was still alive in that place. One of them executed the injured victims on the spot with terrifying skill. Back in the woke building, someone approached our guy, apparently wanting to help him. He told that person that he was an E-rank awakened, who was looking for missions according to his level. Hearing that, other awakened ones nearby assumed that it must be garbage. Trying to face something too dangerous, since even the most basic missions there were D-rank. Some random woman looking like a background character made fun of him, saying it was hilarious that an E-rank woke was basically trying to commit suicide by accepting missions he couldn't handle. For them, the E-ranks were just garbage, parasites of the world. Immediately, everyone banded together to try to kick him out of the building. Because, as they said, garbage belongs to the garbage heap. But our guy had just received 5 million won. And he knew that his top priority now was to get an interesting mission. While I was being harassed by all those extras, someone came in. And his presence was absolutely overwhelming, making everyone there feel intense fear. That pressure was really crazy. Whoever it was had to be at least of rank of. Everyone else who woke up was terrified. It was then revealed that the person was actually a cosplayer. His clothes were strange, his design unusual, but he was definitely strong. Our protagonist studied it carefully, wondering what a rank there was doing. I could feel that she had a strong energy, and yet she seemed like a spoiled and delicate girl. And most importantly, he did not perceive any murderous intent on her part. The girl was accompanied by a bodyguard. Apparently, they were looking for someone of rank D, preferably a minor, to enter a dungeon. It didn't take long for them to notice our guy, who seemed completely unfazed by the girl's intimidating aura. Finally, our protagonist realized that it was his time to shine. The cosplayer girl, for her part, was impressed by how calm he was, completely indifferent to her pressure. While the receptionist was trying to guide her to some decent wake-ups, the girl said it wouldn't be necessary. He had already found the minor he needed. The receptionist quickly tried to explain that our protagonist had just arrived, and that what she was suggesting might be against the rules. But by showing him that power is what really rules the world, he made it clear that she was the one who made the rules, and that she had already decided that he would be her minor. With that, they headed to another room, and our protagonist followed her. It was the first time the receptionist had seen something like this in his entire life. Once inside the dungeon, a creature tried to attack the awakened team. A man who specialized in playing the flute began to use his instrument, but its melody was so lethal that it literally made the creature's head explode. It became clear that the team of the cosplayer girl was extremely well balanced, with awakened wrestlers of all different classes. Our protagonist noticed how fluently, about how they worked together and how easily they progressed in the mission. But there was something that bothered him. There was a minotaur nest below them, which meant that this dungeon was way above the D-rank difficulty. There was no way his companions hadn't figured that out yet. Finally, the dark entity inside our boy's heart. He confirmed that his sense of shadow had become stronger. Now I could perceive what was hidden inside that place. To our guy, it seemed obvious that the rich girl had also realized that something was wrong, and was hiding it for some reason. The bard approached her to tell her that the information they had about the starlight crystal needed to be corrected, and that he was definitely further along. Just at that moment, the cosplayer girl called our protagonist, which only made him more suspicious, since this place was extremely dangerous. When he got closer to her, the sinister aura surrounding her became even stronger. Maybe he was planning to use it as bait, or maybe he was just too confident in his abilities. But as soon as he got closer, the ground suddenly gave way, and they both fell into a pit that seemed to have no end. Fortunately, they landed on their feet like cats, giving our protagonist the opportunity to assess the threat that awaited them. Several D-rank minotaurs were there, ready to be cut into pieces like meat in a butcher shop. Staying alert, our protagonist noticed that the cosplayer girl was getting ready to make her first move. She released a powerful aura, and didn't seem scared at all by the creature's presence. But after a few seconds, she began to look more and more anxious. To the surprise of our protagonist, he asked her, the miner, to go first and face the creatures, promising to support him from behind. Our guy noticed how embarrassed she looked. The situation was so strange that he even fell to his knees, saying that he didn't care about anything else, and that he preferred the miner to advance first. Completely shocked, our protagonist reminded her that she was an awakened one, of rank B. There was no way I couldn't deal with those creatures. Still, she kept insisting. And now, completely desperate, with tears in her eyes, she promised to pay him 1 million Korean won. For someone who claimed to hate capitalism, that seemed like a pretty good deal to our guy. After all, you don't make $1 million every day. Squeezing his shadow dagger, he decided he could take the job. And he threw himself into combat. The poor minotaurs pounced on him, hoping to bring him down. But then he realized something. The creatures weren't pointing at him at all. They were charging straight at the cosplayer girl who just stood there, paralyzed. In that brief moment, panic struck our protagonist. If she died there, she wouldn't get paid. Terrified by the presence of such creatures, the cosplayer girl finally managed to summon an incredibly powerful energy barrier. Our guy never imagined that he would be able to do something like this, especially after seeing the miserable state he was in. But now that she had used her technique, one of the minotaurs tried to hit her with his axe. It was then that our protagonist intervened to save the day, cutting the creature with one of the artifacts he had collected in the first cave. Now he was ready to take revenge on those monsters. My God, if you watch this scene carefully, the eyes of our protagonist looked completely unbalanced, almost wild. When he looked at the cosplayer girl, he realized that she was already running away from the combat, as if she was terrified. But for our guy, that was not a problem at all. All I had to do was cut those monsters into pieces. Meanwhile, the girl ran down the corridor, desperately trying to find a safe place. Panting heavily, he began to catch his breath, thinking that he was finally safe from danger. Without realizing that the evil was still coming closer, she noticed the stench of bull urine, and to her surprise she was cornered again. The monsters were not afraid of him at all. Exhausted and terrified, there was nothing I could do anymore. Our protagonist knew that she was capable of fighting back, but he could not understand why she kept running away, protecting herself from every attack. He raised his hand to his face, activating the power of an artifact he was carrying with him. That little bracelet created a large protective field around it, and once again the creature was repelled. But after that, the artifact shattered, and our guy realized that she had depended solely on it to survive. Approaching her once more, he deduced that she was an awakened fighter who was not specialized in combat. But when her secret was exposed, she told him that she could not tell anyone. And being the opportunist that he was, he let her know that keeping secrets came at an additional price. What I couldn't understand was why the creatures kept focusing only on the girl. That was extremely strange. Thanks to all the experience he had gained, our guy took his sense of shadows to level 2, using it to scan the surroundings. The behavior of those creatures was completely out of line. They were following a mysterious sound, being controlled by someone. While he was trying to defend both himself and the cosplayer girl, she called him out. No matter what they did, the creatures kept advancing frantically and desperate to taste human flesh. And our guy realized that this was a battle with no end in sight. What made it all worse was that he couldn't use his most destructive abilities because he had to protect the girl. She could get caught in the crossfire. But then he noticed that the mysterious figure seemed to be specifically targeting the girl, which could actually play in his favor. Using the shadows as a tool, he decided to give that person exactly what he wanted. Walking towards the creatures after immobilizing them, he announced that the cosplayer girl was completely helpless, as she had already exhausted all her gadgets. It would be better not to let her get cornered. Hearing that, the girl felt a mixture of shame and fear. I shouldn't have said that out loud. As our guy was charging back to the match, a dark presence approached the cosplayer girl. The killer thought that a simple miner could ruin his whole plan, but now he had a chance to finish her off. While he was completely unable to defend himself, with the knife in his hand, he was about to take her life, blaming the girl and her father for everything that had happened. But before he could complete the attack, his arm was cleanly severed. Hopefully he can write with the other one. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, it turned out to be the bard of the cosplayer girl's own team. The one whose flute playing was so bad that he could make monsters' heads explode. He was the one behind everything that had been going on inside the dungeon. After being exposed, the bard began to smile like a maniac. Losing to a simple miner was driving him crazy. Gathering all his power, he made it clear that he was far from defeated. Energy lines spread throughout the cave, absorbing and controlling the surrounding creatures. Then, radiating a violent aura, the bard prepared to unleash the true potential of an awakened one who commands monsters. Our protagonist immediately realized that this guy must be of rank C, while the cosplayer girl stood there in shock, amazed that she could absorb the life force of such creatures. At the same time, the entire area was becoming more dangerous. Molten lava began to bubble up from the floor of the cave. Our guy did not expect to face a rank C opponent. This was truly impressive and scary. A lava minotaur appeared in front of them, a C-rank monster that looked brutally powerful. The beast roared and charged to attack. Not wanting to die right there, our boy summoned a shadow barrier. But the impact was so devastating that it almost destroyed the entire cave. Realizing that his barrier had been partially shattered, our boy began to feel fear creeping in. Part of her skin had been burned by the creature's attack, which left the cosplayer girl deeply worried. This battle was definitely not going in his favor. Faced with the danger, our guy grabbed her hand and told her to hold on tight. They immediately started running. The girl, confused and barely managing to keep up with him, was about to be overtaken by the creature's attack. But the disaster was avoided thanks to the fact that our protagonist used his shadows to tie up the enraged monster. That gave them just enough time to run away. Looking over his shoulder, he told the cosplayer girl to pay close attention. Once they reached the maze, she was to run forward no matter what. Worried, she asked what he planned to do. And he told her that she had to restrain the creature and buy him time to escape. After all, he still wanted his payment. He silently wished that she would find a safe place to hide, promising that he would reach her soon. With her out of the picture, our protagonist could now concentrate on the fight as he wanted. Determined to earn the easiest money of his life. Having completely transformed into the lava minotaur, the bard was furious. He had no idea where his prey had gone. It was then that our guy rebelled, mocking the stupid anger of the creature. Enraged, the monster swung his axe at him, desperate to find the cosplayer girl. The blow slammed into the cave, sending out destructive shockwaves. Our guy immediately dodged and counterattacked, delivering precise blows to the creature's joints. But then he felt a chill. His sword wasn't strong enough to pierce that armor. The bard laughed, saying that our boy must be an idiot for trying to cut stone with such a pathetic dagger. Enraged, he swung the gun again, lava splashing everywhere. Realizing that this fight would not go well if he kept in that open space, our guy tried to lure the monster into the maze. But the persecution could not last forever, and the Minotaur knew it. Then our protagonist summoned all the power of shadows, because no matter how strong an opponent was, there was always a weak point. While he was looking for that vulnerability, the Minotaur bellowed that he was going to finish him off. He got dangerously close and threw a killer punch, but missed. Finally, our protagonist saw it. The weak point of the monster right on his back. He raised his sword, ready to strike a devastating blow. But before he could do so, he was taken by surprise once more. The bard knew exactly what he was planning. And I wasn't going to let it happen that easily. After throwing his last blow, our guy said to the creature that none of his tricks would work anymore. Although the raw power of that monstrosity was still terrifying. Completely exhausted, he had to dodge the monster's next attack. Summoning a shadow dagger in his hand, he committed to his strategy, waiting for the perfect moment to attack. The Minotaur realized that the boy was not going to run away. That would only make killing him easier. Swinging his axe with brutal force, he mocked our boy's skills and the useless weapons he was using. Finally, our protagonist found an opening to attack his weak point. But something strange began to happen on the monster's back, leaving him in shock. That point began to radiate an intense heat, forcing him to retreat. Almost burned alive, he understood that even with only one arm, the bard was smart enough to protect his greatest weakness. The creature realized that its weak point had been discovered. But that wouldn't change anything. That place was now burning at 2000 degrees Celsius. She suggested to our guy to tell her where the cosplayer girl was hiding to spare her life. But our protagonist would never betray her. He refused to trust someone so vile. Enraged by the confident rejection, the Minotaur swore that he would completely erase it. Determined to protect his pride, the monster charged at him once more. He dodged him and untied another shadow skill, throwing a chain at the monster. He almost hit his face, but that glitch seemed deliberate. He redirected the chain in midair, sending it straight at the creature's weak point, coming dangerously close to hitting. But the heat it radiated was so intense that its leaves could not keep their shape. Seeing this, the lava minotaur told him that it was useless to keep trying, and demanded that he stop playing stupid games. Dodging death once more, Lee realized that his power was draining away too fast. The longer the fight went on, the worse things got. For a moment, he considered asking for help, but immediately rejected the idea. He was not going to give his body to that dark entity anymore. Gaining the elevated position over his opponent, he prepared. This was her chance to finish him off and reclaim all that experience. He shot down like a projectile, shadow spear in hand, aiming directly at the weak spot. I knew I couldn't waste this opportunity. As he got closer, his body started to burn, but it didn't stop. At last he struck the weak spot, and the creature let out a hideous cry of pain. That sent her into a berserker frenzy, increasing her attack, speed, and critical damage. Seriously injured, the Minotaur was now completely determined to kill him. But our guy had spent most of his stamina trying to finish the fight, and he was seriously injured. The bard was shocked that the battle had lasted so long. For him, our protagonist was nothing more than a miner. But he made it clear that this was not going to continue anymore. It was then that our protagonist felt his heart beating violently. For some inexplicable reason, a dark energy was surging inside him, stronger than ever. Then the entity finally spoke up, saying that that power had always been within him, but that his body had never been able to channel it properly. Thanks to this fight, he had unlocked a new form of his shadow skill. Even his wounds were completely healed. Seeing this, the Minotaur was speechless, unable to understand what had caused such a miraculous recovery. In addition, the aura that our guy radiated was absolutely sinister. It had become much more dangerous. Using every bit of intelligence he had left, the Minotaur realized that he could not allow our protagonist to fully recover. He tried to attack, but failed. Even with his speed increase, he was still slower than his opponent. That only made the Minotaur even more enraged. All that power made no sense to him. Desperate to tilt the fight in his favor, he decided to flood the arena with lava. The molten rock rushed towards our boy, and the Minotaur began to celebrate what he thought would be his victory. Only then did he realize that something had gone terribly wrong. Our boy was standing up. That about the molten stone. He finally understood what his shadow enhancement really was. And now the heat generated by the Minotaur no longer intimidated him. Having tried everything, the creature felt fear for the first time. Now it was our guy's turn to take control of the fight. Much stronger than before, he charged forward with complete confidence, determined to get this over with quickly. His shadow dagger was now so powerful that it cut through the stone as if it were butter. The bard realized too late that he had just lost another arm, which only angered him even more. He tried to counterattack, but thanks to the increased power of our guy, he lost the other arm as well. A brutal demonstration of how things would be from now on. Still not running out of tricks, the lava Minotaur regenerated new arms made of molten rock. As long as there was lava in the area, it could heal indefinitely, which meant that our boy's attacks would be useless. But hearing that just made our protagonist smile. Now I could put that regeneration to the test, especially because he could feel that the Minotaur's power was gradually weakening. Angry that the boy had noticed, the creature attacked once more. But before he could even complete his first blow, his arms were shattered again. Knowing that defeat was coming, he kept trying to fight until his regeneration began to fail. Now he had short and deformed arms. That's when our protagonist told him that he had reached his limit and that he should just give up. Completely terrified, the bard begged him to reconsider. There was no need for them to fight to the death. But our guy replied that that was exactly what he wanted. After all, he was making $1 million. Since it was now about money, the Minotaur tried to negotiate, saying that if they handed over the girl, once they returned to the city, he would pay $5 million. But our guy was sure it was a trap. There was no guarantee that the Minotaur wasn't going to come after him for revenge later. Desperate, the bard kept trying to convince him that trusting him was the smart choice, even after trying to kill him for several chapters. But our protagonist, always cunning, had a better idea. Maybe it would be smarter to turn the traitor over to the cosplayer girl. That way he would earn even more money from the fight, and build a stronger connection with his family, which was worth more than any payment. The Minotaur knew that if he was captured, he would be tortured to death, and even his family would pay the price. If that was the only result left, I was willing to fight a little longer. He pulled out a mysterious artifact, surprising even the shadow entity, who could not understand how the Minotaur had gotten a fragment of the door. If that artifact was destroyed, this entire dimension would be cut off from the outside world, trapping them there forever. The Minotaur said he had no other choice. But before he could destroy the artifact, our guy managed to snatch it out of his hands. Not only that, he also once again approached his weak point, and after thrusting his weapon into him, the Minotaur let out an agonized scream. The monster's body was completely disintegrating, pierced by the shadows of our boy, until he was finally defeated. From his remains emerged a stone of energy. Our guy noticed that the Minotaurs they had faced before had not dropped any stones. They had all been with the bard. Absorbing them gave him even more mastery over his shadow abilities. But then the whole place started shaking. The shadow entity warned him that the creature's power had been what kept the labyrinth stable. Outside the portal, people were waiting. No one had expected the dungeon to be so dangerous. And look at that, it looked like everyone had made it out alive. There was the cosplayer girl talking to our guy. Now that everyone was safe, he said he had no plans to join any organization, and asked her to keep quiet about the skills she had seen him use. She accepted, as she also had secrets of her own to protect. Then he finally paid her. After receiving the money, he remembered something else and showed him the huge sword, asking if it could be sold somewhere. Examining the weapon carefully, the cosplayer girl said that there was no energy fluctuation coming from it, but that the material itself was excellent. Still, he explained that the object would have to be evaluated by experts. So our protagonist left the sword with her, waiting to give you news later. Now he knew exactly to whom he would sell his future loot, and I expected her to be generous. Unlike that black market mafia boss. Back at home, he asked the shadow entity, which was really the fragment he had taken from the Minotaur. The entity explained that the more he gathered of those artifacts, the easier it would be to achieve an S-rank power. That tempted him greatly. While observing the object, the entity also pointed out that if those things were reappearing, it meant that those bastards were acting up again, implying that he should speed up his recovery. And the key to that recovery was the boy himself. Eventually, he would have to face forces that went far beyond human comprehension. The entity didn't know whether to warn him now or let him find out for himself. Either way, the most important thing was that he had to become stronger right away. Determined to get stronger, our guy went to another portal, one guarded by fighters of rank between B and C. With his current strength, going through it would be difficult, but he wanted to know the truth. Even the shadow entity was curious about what might be inside that E-rank portal. Our protagonist was determined to go through it to discover the truth behind the death of his parents. When it all happened, they had been given a symbolic compensation by the company they worked for. Only one payment for an accident at work. The manager of the company had the gall to ask him if he didn't think the amount was enough. But all our boy ever wanted was the truth. Grabbing the man by the head, he heard again that it had been an accident. His parents had been minors, and that was the end of the story. But our protagonist refused to believe it, because he knew that his parents were C-rank awakeners. There was no way they could have died like that. I was convinced that they were still alive somewhere inside that portal. After venting his anger, one of the manager's bodyguards restrained him, warning him that the portals were dangerous. But for our guy, that didn't make sense. Something so cruel happening inside an E-rank portal. I was sure that the truth was being hidden. When she continued to cause a scandal, the man came close to smashing her teeth. But the attack was stopped by the arrival of a powerful businessman. One who was also in a rank awakened. He was the president of the company, and was clearly disappointed with his subordinate. He told her that she should treat families who had lost loved ones with greater professionalism. Turning to our guy and speaking to him politely, he asked him to accept the money. Knowing perfectly well that the amount was not enough for him to restart his life, but still wishing him the best. Knowing that he also wanted the truth, the president of the company promised that they would investigate what happened. That ignited a little hope in our guy's heart, but finally they decided to blame his parents for the failure at work. That ended up leaving him with a huge debt, as they had an important mission ahead of them. The dark entity told him that he needed power, if he really wanted to achieve what he desired. Instead of standing idly by, he should gather more portal fragments to become stronger. Only then could he achieve his goals. Our guy said he already knew that. But since shadow energy couldn't be detected, he was still classified as rank E, which made his life extremely difficult. The strange part of their relationship was that the entity helped him, but at the same time, he wanted to keep his body. After Lee spent some time thinking absurd things, the entity became enraged, saying that she had had enough of his nonsense. But to our guy it just sounded like a childish tantrum, which only further irritated the entity. While they were arguing, Lee noticed a message coming to his phone, an invitation to join a mission. Then he went to a portal in the industrial area of the city. This one was rated as rank D. Unfortunately, it arrived a bit late. Once there, he met up with an old coworker. It had been a long time since they had last seen each other, and it seemed that they had a friendly relationship. It had been 5 years since the accident involving her parents. The other mercenaries who were waiting, they were waiting for someone important to appear. But when they saw that it was only a miner, they immediately began to look over him, over the shoulder. Back to the explanation of the mission, the mercenaries asked what the goal was. They were told that they needed to find ice crystals, minerals, and other samples. A total of 60 kilograms. Our guy heard that the area was restricted, and that the size of the equipment seemed excessive. Sensing the hostility of others, Lee realized that this was not going to be easy. There was even another C-rank fighter present. Everyone on that unusual team was being watched by a suspicious man who seemed eager to play with them. He was the second in command of the Lone Shark gang and was clearly preparing to commit atrocities. While walking next to his old companion, our protagonist was asked if he no longer needed a protective suit. He told the older man that he was now an awakened one. This surprised the mercenaries. A miner who was also an awakened combatant was not something they saw every day. Hearing some of them muttering insults, his former partner intervened and made it clear that he did not agree with their nonsense. As they were moving through the area, our guy noticed that the vegetation seemed to have been intentionally altered to facilitate concealment, and he felt something sinister in the place. While I was thinking about this, something happened in the blink of an eye. But our guy pretended that nothing had happened, although he was sure that the mercenaries had noticed it too. Someone was watching them from inside the forest. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the bald mercenaries shouted at the miners to pick up the pace, which gave our protagonist the perfect opportunity. Since the terrain was uneven and full of vegetation, he could use it to sneak away from the mercenaries and find out what was really going on. So he told his partner to hold his hand tightly. They had something to attend to. Right after that, our guy ran out, and his speed was so impressive that the mercenaries began to wonder if a miner should even be able to move like that. None of them bothered to follow them. In their minds, those two were nothing but trash who would die without their protection anyway. Meanwhile, the sinister man from the Lone Shark gang was carefully watching his victims. He was finally ready to unleash his atrocities. Then one of the mercenaries admitted that he had a feeling that they were being watched. But their leader dismissed it, saying the bald man was just being paranoid. The truth was that another of his companions had felt the same way since they entered the area. The place gave off an eerie vibe. Trying to convince the others, he suggested that they return to the safety of the outside world. But as they were talking, something horrifying happened right in front of them. The bald man was suddenly captured by a technique that hit instantly. His stalker finally rebelled, and had no intention of letting his prey disperse. It was the blood leopard. Knowing that the danger was imminent, and seeing that their companion was still alive, the mercenaries tried to save him, which only further angered the blood leopard. In an instant, he ended the life of the bald man. The other two were furious when they saw what had happened. One of them charged at the attacker, but his arm was caught, and the next instant, his entire body was immobilized by threads of blood. There was nothing the mercenary could do. The threads of blood cut him to pieces, turning him into failure, like a human puzzle. The last surviving mercenary was terrified, and ran for his life, which only gave the blood leopard more pleasure. Far away from there, our protagonist was sitting with his coworker, suggesting that they get some rest. While they were talking, he asked the older man if he had made any powerful enemies. But the truth was that the man was just an ordinary worker. I hadn't even had the chance to make such enemies. Only then did our protagonist reveal that this was not a mission at all. It was a death trap. Someone wanted to make sure none of them would ever come back. Hearing that left the older man in shock. At that moment, the last surviving mercenary arrived. He confronted our boy, accusing him of having realized the danger and not having done anything about it, which led to the death of his classmates. At least it wasn't completely useless, our guy thought. Now that his brothers had been slaughtered, he had finally understood that someone was hunting them. Our protagonist even made it clear that the life of that mercenary was about to end. Without understanding what he meant, the mercenary suddenly noticed threads of blood surrounding his body. And the blood leopard was impressed that a simple miner had such a sharp perception. That was because our boy was using his sense of shadows. The blood leopard got closer to our protagonist. Terrified, the mercenary begged him not to harm them, saying that they were just small fish. The murderer replied that he had no personal grudge against the miner, but he made it clear that the old man talked too much, and that a few days ago he had let important information slip. With his skills, our protagonist had already analyzed exactly what this man was capable of. In desperation, the old miner swore that he would take the secret to his grave, and that he had not told anyone. But with a menacing glint in its eyes, the blood leopard showed its claws. In seconds, he attacked the poor old man, saying that the dead tell no secrets. That made our protagonist go into an absolute rage and charged forward wielding his shadow daggers. The fight between them finally started, and the blood leopard didn't expect to find someone so skilled in a place like that. Knowing what our boy had done on the black market, the killer made it clear that this time things would end differently. With a single blow of its claws, it tore the ground under their feet, leaving deep marks on the forest floor. Thinking that our guy was trying to end his own life in the most painful way possible, the blood leopard was delighted to oblige him. He unleashed a series of devastating attacks on him. None managed to kill him, although some left superficial wounds. That's when Lee realized that even his shadow reinforcement wasn't enough to completely block those attacks. The blood leopard noticed that his opponent was losing concentration, and took advantage of the opening to crash him into a tree, leaving him slightly injured. Knowing that this fight was only getting more dangerous, our guy called the old man to come to him quickly. He also understood that getting into hand-to-hand combat against that monster was too risky. The blood leopard promised that they would both die before the end of the day. But our protagonist, activating his sense of shadows to the maximum, was determined to prove him wrong. He threw several energy daggers at his enemy, but each and every one was blocked with ease. Of course, that had just been a distraction. I was looking for a chance to take the blood leopard by surprise. And the killer noticed that this guy still had more hidden tricks up his sleeve, but with a simple wave of his hands, he destroyed the energy weapon and taunted him, reminding him that he was still only E-rank. At that moment he was interrupted. The old man had emerged from the ground near the killer's feet, using some kind of trap, but the blood leopard let himself get caught. He already knew what was going on, and didn't feel threatened in the slightest. After all, hand-to-hand combat was his specialty. Before the old man could even react, the blood leopard wrapped him with blood threads, and tore him apart on the spot. Our protagonist did not expect things to end like this. Wait a minute. It wasn't the old man. He was a different guy. May God have him in his glory. Now our protagonist was running away with the old man at his side, and of course, the blood leopard wasn't going to let them escape just like that. Luckily, they managed to flee and find a slightly safer place where they could treat the old man's wounds. With curiosity, our guy asked him what the hell he had done to make the blood leopard chasing him. Nervous, the old man revealed something completely shocking. He had discovered the truth behind the death of our protagonist's parents. That information immediately put our guy in serious mode. Now he was overflowing with power and rage. And remember, rage has an incredible synergy with the power of shadows. The perfect time for a little old-fashioned violence. Eager to get answers, our protagonist bombarded the old man with questions. I needed to know what I had discovered. Then wait, because that guy didn't wear his mask inside a dungeon. For God's sake, don't do that. If he took off his mask, he could die. The whole place was radioactive. Anyway, the old man said he wasn't sure at first. But now that the blood leopard had come to kill him, he had the proof he needed. Before the incident at the mine, I had heard our boy's father talking about how the company manager was conducting dangerous experiments in that area. And just a few days later, something went terribly wrong. And our boy's parents were the ones blamed for it. Furious, the boy demanded to know why the old man had not spoken then. Regretfully, the old man admitted that he had failed, but said that at the end of the day he was just a miner. He couldn't afford to lose his job. He also had a family to feed. Our protagonist, boiling with anger, could not believe that the old man had allowed his parents to suffer under false accusations. And the old man was really sorry. I had been carrying that guilt for all those years. Their conversation was interrupted when the blood leopard found them again, determined to end their lives. The problem was that our guy was furious, but before he could act, the old man was captured. While he was being killed, he apologized to our protagonist, saying that he just didn't want her to hate him. Finally, the blood leopard recognized familiar features on our boy's face, realizing that he was the son of those C-rank miners, and told him that he would be reunited with them soon. The two collided, exchanging blows. This time, however, our protagonist was driven by hatred. Even so, he was still being pushed back by his opponent. The sociopath, known as the blood leopard, enjoyed every second. Clearly, someone twisted in the head. Our poor boy was about to be beaten beyond recognition. So he decided to take out one of the huge swords he had found in that first dungeon. For the first time, he managed to cut the blood threads of the blood leopard. Finally, the fight felt balanced, and the villain didn't like it at all. He thrived having the upper hand. Unfortunately, our protagonist was close to his limit. He didn't have much strength left to wield that huge sword. The blood leopard realized that his last attack had been just a hoax and attacked immediately, retying him with blood threads. Now, completely immobilized and captured, there was nothing our boy could do. But his silence disturbed the blood leopard. I felt that the boy was up to something, and if that was the case, the villain was excited. He loved to see that kind of fire in the eyes of his victims. She decided to share a little secret with him. He told her that her parents had not died in an accidental collapse at the mine. It had been him, the blood leopard, who killed them in cold blood. That revelation added more fuel to the hatred that was already burning inside our boy. According to the villain, it was the same look that his father had given him in his last moments after watching his wife die. Then the bastard began to describe in detail how he had massacred the parents of our protagonist. And it was absolutely disgusting. But then the villain noticed something. The blood threads he had summoned were completely burning. A massive power was gushing out of our protagonist's body as his rage reached the peak. He took deliberate and heavy steps towards his enemy. Behind him, the shadowy dark entity manifested, towering up in an imposing manner. Driven by an absolute rage, our boy swore that he would end that bastard's life. Only then did the blood leopard realize that our protagonist could feed his power with his own hatred. And indeed, the emotion was so intense that his strength was completely recalibrating, ascending to the next stage of violence. The blood leopard had no idea how the boy's wounds had healed, but that didn't scare him. He liked it when his prey offered a little entertainment before being killed. But our protagonist no longer felt like the prey. On the contrary, in the shadow dimension, he was now the hunter. In the blink of an eye he appeared behind the villain. The blood leopard had no idea how his victim had suddenly become so strong, and that infuriated him. He tried to attack our guy, but his speed was not remotely enough to match him. This time, our protagonist threw several shadow daggers at the bastard, and the blood leopard managed to block them all. Now with more refined abilities, our boy used shadow teleportation, a highly efficient movement, and came close to taking the blood leopard by surprise. As he had reduced much of the distance between them, it was because of an attack. But unfortunately, his blow was blocked by the villain's blood threads. The blood leopard still believed himself untouchable, but then he realized that the boy had disappeared. It had been nothing more than a feint. Our protagonist was not aiming at his defenses at all. The enemy's biggest weakness was that his reaction speed was lower than the speed with which the boy could reposition himself and attack. And for the first time in the entire fight, our guy managed to land solid punches in the bastard's flesh. The blood leopard, now seriously injured, could not believe what had just happened. Falling to my knees, I couldn't understand how I was losing to a simple child. In the last moments of his life, our protagonist gave him an opportunity to confess what had really happened in that mine 5 years ago. The blood leopard, furious, told our boy to stick it where the sun does not reach. After that act of defiance came the coup, and the blood leopard lost an arm. Poor guy was going to have to learn to write with the other hand. He howled in pain, and our protagonist seemed to really enjoy it. He made it clear that his patience had run out, and she hinted that she might start cutting him in other places if he didn't speak up. Defeated, the blood leopard admitted that it made no difference whether he was telling the truth or not. The blame fell on the top managers of the company and on the boy's father, who had discovered something he shouldn't have. But thanks to that confession, our protagonist finally had a name, Choi. Just another generic Chinese-sounding name that I might not even remember later. Maybe the president, maybe that pompous manager. But most likely it was the president of the company. After revealing that information, the blood leopard warned that now the boy would have to face the entire company. And he clearly didn't have the strength to do it yet. He then tried to negotiate by asking for his life to be spared, but it was too late. His head was no longer there. Our boy was not going to forgive anyone involved in what had happened to his parents. Back in the real world, the rain was falling hard while our protagonist was heading to the company headquarters where his parents had worked. There he identified the name that the blood leopard had given him. It belonged to a man with a mustache who seemed to have an enormous influence on the place. The shadow entity accompanying our boy knew that he had already reached the C rank, but warned him not to throw away his mustache overboard. After all, there was an rank awakening in the area, and our guy could clearly feel it too. In addition, the founder of the company was also in a rank awakened, and was right there inside the car. Yes, our protagonist was full of hatred, but he was rational. I wasn't going to attack recklessly. Moreover, the words of the blood leopard could not be taken as absolute truth. He was a man of questionable character. Our protagonist needed to investigate further, and find out if the founder had acted alone, or if there were even bigger players behind it all. And that was what really worried him. But there was one thing I was sure of. A blood debt is paid with blood. He followed the car and ended up in an area with a warehouse. There were several whisperers from the Blood Leopard organization inside. It seemed that the cargo they were receiving was something very delicate. The president of the company wanted to know if the old miner was really dead. The chief of the whisperers reported that they had lost contact with the Blood Leopard, and that the portal fragment he had used to infiltrate had also disappeared. For that reason, they could not confirm what had happened to the mission. That left the president of the company very uneasy. I had no idea what might be developing now. As for the leader of the Whisperers, he thought that the Blood Leopard had perhaps acted recklessly. From that moment on, the man who seemed to be the owner of the company would be called Mustache. Knowing that the plan had to go ahead, Mustache ordered the team to be moved to the appropriate area. They were at a critical stage of their experiments and mistakes could not be tolerated. The head of the Whisperers asked if the money was ready to be collected. Meanwhile, our protagonist had successfully managed to infiltrate the warehouse and was listening to everything. It seemed that he had just confirmed that Mustache was really involved in the death of his parents. The leader of the Whisperers suddenly felt the murderous intent radiating from our boy and immediately attacked the place where he was hiding. That made Mustache even more nervous, but the chief Whisperer couldn't find anything. He began to think that perhaps it had only been his imagination, although he was sure that he had felt a chilling murderous intention. Our guy barely managed to hide himself using the power of shadows and let out a sigh of relief. He had almost been discovered. The next day, life continued as normal. Our protagonist went to the company headquarters, and the shadow entity asked him if he really should be there instead of looking for missions to accept. He had gone there to locate the third fragment, and he also wanted to find out how much the weapon he had obtained in the shadow dungeon was worth. Wait a second. This building actually belonged to the Cosplay family. Inside the reception lobby, a secretary greeted him, and our guy asked to see Cosplay. She asked if he had a date, and there seemed to be a couple right behind him. For absolutely no reason, the girl decided to humiliate our protagonist, saying that he was a very daring miner for daring to ask to see Miss Cosplay. It seemed like they were just saying that to inflate their own ego, just to humiliate someone. Our guy was furious and asked if this is really how the guests were treated there. Then the man who was with her, who was clearly just as unbearable, said that our guy was just a dog, not a guest. Finally, our protagonist realized that this whole family was unbearably arrogant, and that there was no point in trying to maintain contact with Miss Cosplay. So he told them he was leaving as he didn't like how they were treating him. Seeing how defiant our boy was, the arrogant man ordered his bodyguards to leave him invalid. But our protagonist used Shadow Step instantly. He not only knocked down the bodyguards, but also grabbed the arrogant guy by the neck. The whole scene turned around instantly. Now the girl was terrified. She warned that if our guy laid a finger on her, he would be married for the rest of his life. Our guy threw the idiot's body at the cocky woman so that they both learned a lesson, making it clear that he spared their lives, only because he was an acquaintance of Miss Cosplay. But here's the funny thing. People love to humiliate others, but the moment they are humiliated back, they suddenly become proud and moralistic. Now that guy was furious, burning with anger, desperate to hit back at our protagonist. She lunged at him with murderous intent, not realizing that our boy's hand was already shrouded in shadows. The fight between the two was about to get intense when someone finally decided to intervene. Thank God, someone with a little common sense. Miss Cosplay finally appeared, asking why our protagonist was causing problems at the headquarters of his family's company. With the fight interrupted, the arrogant man told our protagonist that he was dead, that he would never be forgiven by his sister, Miss Cosplay. But she immediately ordered him to be removed from the building. That's when the asshole realized that he really did have their support. But to his surprise, a man grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. It turned out that he was not even her brother, just a distant cousin. Well, that was it. He was finished. His girlfriend tried to claim that the miner was nothing more than a poor low-class nobody, blurting out a lot of nonsense to justify humiliating him. But Miss Cosplay made it clear that our protagonist was her friend. He also ordered that all the guards who had obeyed the arrogant asshole be fired and put on a blacklist, never to work for the company again. Poor guys, no, they deserved it. Now it was they who were being thrown out like garbage. Miss Cosplay was furious that her family name had been used by such smug fools, warning them that if it happened again, they would not be forgiven. With the situation resolved, he approached our protagonist. She did not expect that he would find her so soon, and suggested that they go somewhere private to talk. He apologized for what he had just witnessed, as the whole scene had been embarrassing. And as they were walking, An employee of the company informed her that the president wanted to meet with her. Miss Cosplay apologized to our guy, asking him to wait only a few minutes, promising that she would come back right away. She seemed anxious about the meeting, but the employee said that the president had not mentioned anything, only that she should come immediately. While our protagonist was waiting alone in that room, someone entered, radiating an overwhelming amount of power. He was an old man, who wanted to know what exactly our protagonist was. From appearances, that man had to be the president of the company, and supposedly the father of Miss Cosplay. Using his ability, our protagonist realized that this man was a rank O awakened, with 2 very powerful abilities. And trying to stay calm and reasonable, our guy said there must have been a misunderstanding, that he was just a minor. But he quickly noticed that he was being mentally attacked. The old man saw that his intimidation was not generating any fear in the boy's heart, and that intrigued him. Unleashing his overwhelming power, he seemed to refuse to believe the minor's explanation, throwing lightning bolts at the boy. But to his surprise, our protagonist blocked the attack flawlessly. That was enough for the president to think that the guy should be at least B rank. Something hard to believe for someone who claimed to be just a minor. What really worried him, however, was the thought that the guy might be using a fake identity to get close to Miss Cosplay. She pressured him to confess the truth before things got even more complicated. But the whole interrogation was interrupted when Miss Cosplay appeared, realizing that her father had tricked her just to interrogate one of his friends. Completely embarrassed, the president was dragged by the ear by his own daughter, while our protagonist just stood there watching, not knowing what to say. It was really strange to think that the president of that company could be so submissive to his own daughter. Miss Cosplay apologized, explaining that her father was an extremely cautious man, who was suspicious of everyone all the time. And our protagonist actually understood that. It seemed that the man was only worried about his daughter being deceived by idiots. Such obvious information somehow surprised the girl. And now I believe that our protagonist really understood his father on a deep level. Outside the room, the company president was looking through the glass with murderous intent. His precious daughter was getting close to someone he didn't know, and he hated that. Miss Cosplay, upset, told her father to leave because he was just getting in the way. Finally, she and our protagonist were able to sit down and talk. She handed him 5 million, apparently the amount she had obtained for the sword he had given her. Then, our protagonist showed him the portal fragment and asked if he knew where he could find it. More. She explained that such fragments used to be more common, but lately someone was buying them in large quantities, making them very rare. He suggested she try an auction house, as one might eventually turn up there. The shadow entity did not like to hear that someone was collecting those artifacts. That could mean one of his deadliest enemies was involved. Meanwhile, the same masked man who had intervened during the fight with the arrogant cousin was now investigating the records of our protagonist. They were analyzing their data carefully. After all, he had gone from E rank to C rank in just a few days. While they were going through his file, the important man got a call. On the other end of the line, there was someone very interested in the sword that Miss Cosplay had brought last time. But the old man had no idea how she had gotten hold of that weapon. The man with the phone made it clear that if there were more of those gadgets, he would buy every last one of them. That made the old man stop and think. He asked why the buyer was so excited, and if the sword had some kind of hidden ability. The buyer could not say much, only that the material from which the sword was made could completely change the military power of that nation. Now the old man was more thoughtful than ever. The background of our protagonist was mysterious, and besides, he had given his daughter extremely valuable weapons. While walking around the auction house building, our protagonist noticed that there were a lot of objects stored there. He thought he might even find more fragments. But to his surprise, he found the same despicable couple he had met on the black market. The arrogant man recognized him immediately, and wondered why the blood leopard hadn't taken care of him yet. Trying to provoke him, he asked what a simple miner was doing in a place like that. Our protagonist said that his memory must have been terrible, and letting a little of his power escape, he asked her if she had already forgotten how it felt to be slapped by him. That was enough to scare him, and begged our boy not to come near. But in his panic, he collided with another person, the leader of the Whisperers. This man told the arrogant idiot that his behavior was an insult to his entire gang. Then, approaching our protagonist, the leader said that humiliating one of his subordinates was the same as humiliating his entire organization, and tried to crush him with his power, forcing him to kneel. But our boy's feet remained firm, cracking the ground under all that pressure. He told the chief of the Whisperers that if he wanted to see him kneeling, he must be dreaming. They both stood there, caught up in that useless competition of strength, while the idiot Arrogant aside, I was sure that our protagonist would end up giving in to the boss's power. That's when Miss Cosplay appeared to stop the situation, and the head of the Whisperers immediately stopped bothering our guy. After all, if he wanted trouble, he could easily get it by confronting his family. And that was a line he wouldn't dare cross. Immediately, the boss ignored what he was doing and apologized to Miss Cosplay, since everyone was just there to buy things at the auction. Miss Cosplay then approached our protagonist and asked if he was okay. And he said yes. He had withstood that pressure without any lasting effect. Once we were away from the crowd, the chief of the Whisperers demanded to know what the story was between our guy and that arrogant idiot. The fool confessed that he had lost a very valuable sword in a fight with our protagonist, and that he had asked the Blood Leopard to take care of him. That revelation angered the chief of the Whisperers. The idiot was a real burden. And while they were having their little moment of reflection, Mustache, the man responsible for the company that had killed our protagonist's parents, also appeared. Through the conversation, the chief of the Whisperers realized that our protagonist had been involved in the last Blood Leopard mission. Now he was wondering how that boy was still alive. There was a small chance that the Blood Leopard had actually been killed by him. But for the arrogant idiot, that was impossible, since the miner was supposedly only Ranky. Even from a distance, our protagonist had to concentrate all his rage just to avoid unleashing that dark murderous intention. Looking at Mustache face to face made it almost impossible to stay calm. On the other hand, the president of the company was surprised by how much the guy had grown in the last 5 years. Now he wanted to know how the boy had managed to get close to Miss Cosplay, to someone connected to such a powerful corporate family. Walking next to her, our guy asked her what she was doing at the auction house, and she explained that her father wanted to meet with him. Worried, he asked if they were going to fight again. I didn't want that, but Miss Cosplay assured her that her father would never try such a thing as long as she was present. Their conversation was interrupted when Bigoti appeared, clearly not expecting to see our protagonist there. Trying to finish the talk quickly, our guy said that he was just a humble miner working to pay his debts, without any interest in mixing with the elites of society. Bigot replied that what had happened to the boy's parents had been a decision made by the company's board of directors. He even claimed that he had wanted to help, but had been outvoted. For our protagonist, Bigot was just washing his hands of all responsibility. He knew exactly what had happened that day. The old miner, their friend who had already passed away, had left a message for them. And our guy quoted a Chinese saying that basically meant that things were about to get really ugly. After hearing that, the Black Panther said that our boy needed to be taught a lesson. But Bigot stopped him as they were in neutral territory. Still, they all agreed on something. The boy knew too much. Someone would have to be sent to remove it. That comment brought a big smile on the Black Panther's face. And finally, Miss Cosplay took our protagonist to meet with her father, just as the auction was about to start. Then Miss Cosplay's father said he wanted to talk to our guy for a moment. With curiosity, our protagonist asked what exactly that old man wanted to talk about. Getting straight to the point, the old man asked if he still had more of those guns that he had asked his daughter to sell. Our protagonist realized that he must be very interested. As he still had a good amount of them, he decided to deliver them little by little. That way the price would stay through the roof. He told the old man that he still had to saved. Then came the crazy offer. Miss Cosplay's father wanted to pay 45 million for them. Our protagonist definitely thought it was an interesting offer, but he made it clear that he was just a miner, and that something like this completely changed his life. Knowing the true value of what he had, he said he wanted 25 million for each sword. Hearing that counter-offer, the old man was completely speechless. I was already starting to think that our guy was getting a little too bold with such aggressive negotiation. But before things got out of control, Miss Cosplay put the brakes on her father again, and he reluctantly agreed to our protagonist's terms. After shelling out that huge amount of money, Miss Cosplay told our guy that the object he wanted should come out to his basta at any time. The small device had already reached 6.5 million and kept climbing, reaching 15 million in a matter of seconds. Our protagonist realized that the fragments he was looking for were really in that auction house, and now he had 70 million to spend. To everyone's surprise, he immediately made an offer of 30 million, making it clear that he was not going to back down. Nearby, Bigot and the Black Panther couldn't figure out why he was doing that. To test him, Bigot made an offer of 50 million, wanting to know how much money our guy really had. Willing to burn everything he had just won, our protagonist raised it to 60 million. Right behind him, the father of Miss Cosplay said that that fragment was not worth anywhere near that amount. suggesting that he stop throwing ridiculous offers or he would just waste all the money he had just received. Miss Cosplay agreed, realizing that Bigot was inflating the price on purpose. But our protagonist was not sure if Bigot really wanted the object or was just playing with it. So he decided to stand firm and resist. Standing next to Miss Cosplay, he asked who really had the deepest pockets, his family's company or Bigot's. It seems that our guy knew exactly how to stir the waters. After hearing that, the old man proudly claimed that his company was much richer than Bigot's. Meanwhile, the bidding for the fragment that our protagonist wanted had already reached 70 million. So he showed the old man some more swords. The man said that he would buy them at the same price as before, but warned our guy that it still might not be enough to compete against Bigot's company. Our protagonist told him not to worry. At that moment, the old man began to suspect that our protagonist might have many more swords than he had admitted. That upset Miss Cosplay, who told her father not to question our protagonist's word. Once again, his father agreed to buy another 70 million in swords. Finally, Miss Cosplay's light bulb went on. He understood our guy's strategy. He had to act fast or Bigot would win the shard. So our protagonist went with everything and made an offer of 100 million. Bigot knew that these fragments were essential for the secret project of his company. So he immediately counterattacked with 200 million. In a matter of moments, the price shot up to 500 million, leaving everyone in the auction house stunned. By such an insane bidding war, the Black Panther immediately realized that our protagonist was becoming a serious obstacle on his way. Taking a decisive step, Bigot made an offer of 1 billion. The entire audience fell silent. It was an absurd amount of money. Miss Cosplay could tell that Bigot was willing to turn this into a wealth battle. Now our protagonist was even more suspicious of him. Behind him, Miss Cosplay's father was clearly restless. I was not sure if our protagonist could really deliver enough weapons to cover such a huge sum. Miss Cosplay made it clear that if there was any loss, she would cover it herself. And he told his dad to stop distracting him so he could focus. Then our protagonist raised the offer to 2,000 million, completely shooting up the value of the fragment. On the other side, Bigot was furious. I have never wanted to spend so much money on a single fragment. Even the Black Panther was shocked without understanding how our protagonist could have such a capital. Bigot believed that there was only one possible source for that money, the company of Miss Cosplay's family, which only angered him even more. As no one made a higher offer, the auctioneer's hammer fell, and our protagonist won the fragment at an extremely inflated price. For him it was still a victory. Miss Cosplay, who loves to see arrogant people being humiliated, celebrated her triumph with genuine emotion. Right after, his father reminded everyone of the most important detail. Someone really had to pay the 2 billion. At that rate, our protagonist would have to deliver 70 swords to settle the debt. And the old man began to question whether he could really produce. But our protagonist calmly explained that rare objects are incredibly valuable, and that a deal of such magnitude could not be calculated in the same way. He then snapped his fingers and revealed 100 swords in one go, asking if the debt was considered settled now. That left everyone stunned. Miss Cosplay's father was deeply impressed, and even started thinking about recruiting him to his organization. Afterwards, Miss Cosplay came closer to our guy and asked him to let her know if anything interesting happened in the future. That made his father very nervous. I could tell that our protagonist was getting too close to his daughter. They went to the payment area of the auction house so that he could receive the fragment. Before leaving, the old man gave our protagonist some advice. His methods might be unconventional, but Bigot's company was equally formidable, and he had to be careful. Sometimes it is better to join forces with people who share the same goals so that those goals can really be achieved. He suggested that she contact him again soon. Meanwhile, the Black Panther was on the phone. Knowing that the old man and Miss Cosplay had already left the building, he informed that it would be our protagonist who would personally pick up the fragment. Bigot told him to wait until the place was emptier. They couldn't risk making a fuss. The Black Panther promised that this time he would bring expert fighters and that nothing would go wrong. Walking through the streets of the city, our protagonist noticed that the old man had gathered a lot of information about him. Forming an alliance could be useful, as long as it didn't end up under the Elder's control. The shadow entity reminded him that if he gathered enough fragments, he would eventually reach the S rank. But it seemed that our protagonist was not entirely convinced. Still, he told the entity that he was doing everything he could to become stronger. Since the entity could read his thoughts, he knew that he still doubted that narrative, and thought that the S rank was very far away. While they were talking, something caught their attention. His apartment building was on fire. People were fleeing in panic as the fire spread, and the whole situation was dangerously chaotic. In the midst of the confusion, our boy's phone started ringing. When he answered, he was told that the Black Panther was already making a move, strategic against him. The recommendation was that he hide for now as they could not guarantee his safety. But our protagonist was already surrounded by the henchmen of the Black Panther. Among them was the same idiot who had tried to fight him on the black market. Driven by anger, our protagonist glared at those bullies, fully prepared to cause real chaos in the heart of the city. But those wretches were still convinced that they would easily win this fight. With complete confidence, our protagonist told them that not even the Blood Leopard had been able to do what they were trying now. That sentence shook them up a bit, making them ask if he was hiding some ace up his sleeve. But since they had a job to fulfill, the first of them jumped in, trying to catch our protagonist from behind with his blade. The only thing he managed to cut was the ground because our guy had already used the shadows to move. Demonstrating his incredible skill, he hit the poor idiot from behind, which left the rest of the band even more shocked. That wasn't supposed to happen, at least not so easily. While the clueless lackeys were trying to figure out how to handle him, the coward tried to run away. But in a matter of seconds, those thugs turned into a human puzzle, giving our protagonist the perfect opportunity to get through. For the coward. Now it was time for something a little more entertaining. The idiot realized that his life was about to end in the most brutal way possible. While our protagonist beat him mercilessly, the guy kept shouting that the director and the Black Panther wouldn't let him get away with it. But the threats didn't work. The man was thrown directly into the flames that were consuming our protagonist's apartment. Just a few seconds later, Miss Cosplay appeared with her loyal bodyguard to rescue him. Standing next to him, I was deeply worried about his condition, but he was fine. Now that he had become a direct target of the Black Panther, she asked him what he planned to do next. Our protagonist made it clear that he was going to fight back. Seeing how determined he was, Miss Cosplay said she would support him in whatever was necessary. Although he wasn't sure why she was getting so involved. Then she revealed that she had also been stalked by the Black Panther, and had now gone to the extent of attacking one of her few friends. She made sure he knew how weird that was, saying it in a way that felt almost suspiciously personal. But our protagonist saw it as a great opportunity. Although she had just lost her apartment that very night, a new chapter of her life was about to begin. And judging by the way things had turned out, our guy had just hit the lottery. Now he was staying at Miss Cosplay's apartment. She told him he could stay there until he found a new place of his own. As the place used to be empty, I could choose any room I wanted. It didn't take long for our protagonist to make his choice, but Miss Cosplay quickly said that that particular room was forbidden. She got very nervous when he insisted, and when she finally came in, she realized that the decoration of the room was very childish. Then he understood what was happening, and teased her, saying that the adorable style of the room perfectly suited her personality. That left her incredibly embarrassed, as she didn't want to be seen that way, especially being the heiress of a gigantic corporation. But for our protagonist it was not a big deal. For him it was just a normal girl's room. And despite being an heiress, Miss Cosplay was still just a woman at the end of the day. In fact, she was even cuter when she acted like this, instead of trying to maintain her usual cold and distant personality in front of others. That compliment left the cosplay girl incredibly nervous. The closer our protagonist gets, the less he knows how to act around him. And trying to hide her feelings, she claimed that she was only doing all this because she cared about her safety. And then his stomach roared because he was hungry, obviously. Knowing that, our protagonist instantly made several types of food appear in his hands. These were emergency supplies that he keeps stored in his internal inventory. The cosplay girl was very impressed and wanted to know how she had done that, as she was curious about that skill, since she used it at the auction house. To avoid giving a long explanation, our protagonist simply said that he knew a little magic. Then the cosplay girl asked him to teach her too. In the middle of their conversation, our protagonist suddenly felt a sinister presence. He told the girl to go home immediately, but she wanted to know what was going on. Outside, they were being watched by the president of the company, commonly known as the grumpy father of the cosplay girl. And our protagonist realized that if she didn't leave soon, her father would be furious. Shouting angrily, she began to scold her father for spying on everything she was doing. The apartment in which our protagonist is staying is actually very safe, and it is located in a place where the gang of loan sharks will not disturb him. By now he has already gathered some fragments of his most recent battles, and the auction is about to start. He is curious to know what is the relationship between these fragments and the appearance of the portals. The shadow entity decided to explain it, telling him that the fragments he has gathered are only a small part of what it takes to create a portal, and that every portal that appears in this world is connected to those fragments. After successfully opening a portal inside that room, it was time to go through it. Our protagonist was taken to a dimension that it looked like a vast desert, and he felt curious, wondering if he would encounter any new insects or scary beasts. The dark entity explained that those creatures are simply prisoners of those dimensions, and that the whole place is actually a prison. Our protagonist wanted to know more about the meaning behind all this, but the shadow entity said it would only be able to reveal more information once it passed all the tests. In front of him stood a huge tower, the Tower of Heaven, the masterpiece of this dark entity, and the place where our protagonist would be put to the test. In his thoughts, it seemed to him a ridiculous place. The decor was terrible and didn't make any sense to him. Since the entity can read her thoughts, she was deeply offended, but she had to endure that humiliation to strengthen her own soul. Once inside the tower, our protagonist asked what exactly he was supposed to do there. The agency told him there were 6 floors. For our protagonist, just getting through the first one would already feel like a huge achievement. He was told that the creature guarding the first floor was the shadow dragon, which sounded scary. But when he saw the creature's shadow, he didn't feel any kind of pressure coming from it. Looking closely, he saw the dragon standing right in front of him, and it was so small and adorable that it turned out it was hard to even think of him as a mortal enemy. Our protagonist could not believe that he had to fight against such a small thing, but the shadow entity warned him that he was very wrong. He tried to stroke the dragon's head, but before he could touch it, he felt something strange. The creature's energy suddenly began to increase at a rate alarming, and that increase in power was so sudden and overwhelming that our protagonist was fired all over the room. Only then did he realize that this dragon had many more secrets than he had ever imagined. That little creature was much more dangerous than it looked, and it had now grown several times its original size. With that transformation, his speed and strength had skyrocketed. Our protagonist could hardly believe that sudden increase in power. The shadow entity then claimed, almost mockingly, that the dragon's physical constitution was superior to that of our boy. That comment deeply offended him, but there was no time to argue. I had to fight. Luckily, he managed to dodge the first attack, and immediately prepared to throw his shadow daggers at the dragon's back. He threw them accurately, but the creature darted down the corridor with movements as quick as lightning. When the daggers hit, they simply bounced off his thick armor. Realizing that this would not be an easy fight, our protagonist wondered how that dragon could be so absurdly powerful. The shadow entity warned him that with his current power level, he wouldn't even manage to scratch that creature. That pushed our protagonist to consider more drastic measures. The battle kept escalating, and it almost looked like the dragon had been injected with some kind of steroid. Eva suspect. His body looked bigger and more muscular than before. No matter what he tried, none of his attacks were effective. On the other hand, the shadow entity noticed something important. His dragon was hungry, very hungry, and he let our protagonist know. He was basically a sandwich himself. That little detail seemed to excite the dragon even more, making him charge at him with the clear intention of devouring him alive. Our protagonist barely managed to dodge the attack, his mind racing as he realized that the dynamics of the fight had changed. When he looked back, he saw the dragon practically drooling, which made the situation much more disturbing. While running away from that now gigantic creature, he even wondered if he had his vaccinations up to date. The shadow entity explained that having been without energy for so long, the dragon was desperate to replenish its nutrients. With that knowledge, our protagonist realized that this was not even a proper duel anymore. It was a test of survival. I couldn't just fight without thinking. He really needed to protect himself. So he came up with a plan. Instead of focusing on killing him, he started throwing pieces of food at the dragon. This was his secret technique. The creature's eyes lit up when he saw those chicken pieces, and using all his speed and agility, he started to catch them. That's exactly what our protagonist wanted. While the dragon was distracted and happily eating, he unleashed his shadow whips, completely immobilizing the beast. So, without further ado, he passed the first floor test. The shadow entity, however, seemed disappointed with the result. His precious dragon turned out to be a complete glutton. With the first challenge completed, our protagonist wanted to know what the purpose of all this was. The shadow entity explained that every portal fragment he had collected was linked to a prison built a long time ago, and that gathering all the crystals was the key to unlocking its true purpose. Hearing that there could be even better rewards waiting for him later, Our protagonist got excited to face the next floors. The shadow entity, however, had clearly noticed that he had used a clever trick instead of brute force to win. Almost anxiously now she urged him to make his way at once to the second floor. That the guardians there would be very different. Perceiving something in his tone, our protagonist instantly realized that the entity was up to something. They were now being transported to the second floor, and our guy prepared for the worst. The entity told him to look first so as not to act recklessly. Once they arrived, the company said that there was no real danger there. Trusting in those words, our guy advanced and opened the door in front of him. And as soon as she entered the next room, she was shocked. He came face to face with several terrifying creatures, each of them a serious threat on its own. What I didn't expect was that all those monstrosities were servants of the entity of the shadows. All those monsters started advancing towards him, hungry to taste his meat. The gigantic winged snake was about to deliver a fatal blow, but he barely managed to dodge it, and now he was very worried. After entering that room, the exit wasn't sealed, so at least I had an escape route. The snake shouted to the others to kill the intruder, and each and every one of them charged at him with all his strength. Thanks to his shadow reinforcement, he managed to gain a little time. With every ounce of determination, he ran towards the exit, dodging all those creatures. And let's be honest, the illustrator here was really lazy. Every monster that appeared had already come out earlier in the story, except for the winged snake. Using his absurd agility, our guy managed to narrowly escape and slam the door shut behind him. Breathing hard, he accused the shadow entity of lying about those creatures being his servants. But the truth was that the entity never really lied. The problem was simply that our guy was still too weak. The entity also needs entertainment from time to time, and he admitted that he loved watching him run around like a scared child. As they were talking, the presence of a life form was detected nearby. Outside was the father of the cosplay girl who had come to meet our protagonist. Once they met in the room, the old man revealed that the gang of moneylenders had become a problem. Our guy admitted that he had been a target of theirs, and that everything he was doing now was for his own defense. But he decided that the time had come to strike first. The old man explained that the gang of moneylenders was causing problems on his territory, but that he hadn't acted yet because he wanted to know his true motive. He did not want to upset the fragile balance that exists between the great powers of the city. That could ruin the economy. Even if you despise the work of lenders, you cannot make a move unless they do something truly serious. Otherwise, if he acts too soon, it could provoke a huge power struggle, and someone would inevitably lose out. Our protagonist realized that the old man did not want to directly involve his family in the conflict, which was exactly what he wanted to. Still, the old man knew that something had to be done, and suggested that our guy, together with the cosplay girl, form a new organization so that an open war could be carried out properly. And he even promised to provide funding and manpower to make it happen the right way, so that other powerful families could not interfere. The old man guaranteed that he would protect them. Our protagonist was impressed by how skillful he was at weaving strategies, but the old man made it very clear that if it were not for his daughter's insistence, he would not be doing any of this. And now I wanted to know what kind of spell our protagonist had cast on his precious daughter. Our guy hates having to put up with the old man's overly dramatic monologues, feeling that her father was about to vent even more. The cosplay girl kicked him out of the room with a kick. Now that he was away, she wanted to know what our protagonist was planning to do next. As he is still an awakened one, his intention is to accept new missions in order to continue strengthening himself. Now that she knows what she wants to do, the cosplay girl promised that she would help him. What our protagonist really wants is to gather an even greater amount of fragments to unleash terror and destruction on the gang of moneylenders. The people in front of him are carefully selected individuals to be part of the organization they are going to create. And all these men seem more than willing to serve their new boss. Since our protagonist took too long to choose a name, the cosplay girl chose one. By him, the Shadow Faction. Our protagonist really liked the name and began to inspect his new subordinates. They all seem to be Category C awakened, which is a clear sign that their new strength is really impressive. But then he wanted to know why everyone was wearing masks. The cosplay girl explained that it was to protect their identities from external threats. Although we all know that it's only because the artist is lazy. He even tried to put a phrase in the cosplay girl's mouth, saying that they looked cooler that way. But I don't agree at all. And look at that, even the protagonist agreed with me. He also said that the artist is lazy. Anyway, back to the story. The cosplay girl wanted to know what the next move would be, and our protagonist said that they were going to steal jobs, that is, they were going to take all the commissions that the gang of moneylenders has in this city. The cosplay girl thought that might be a little too intense, but our protagonist clarified that they would only take the really valuable jobs. He already has a plan for the rest. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone is being punished for their own incompetence. He is one of the subordinates of the head of the lenders. Apparently, the Shadow faction has already become a serious competitor. And now this man needs to vent his frustration. His subordinate explained that the Shadow faction is extremely efficient. They send at least 6 Category C awakened on each mission, which makes it almost impossible to compete. The head of the lenders realized that this competition is unfair, since the new faction is injecting money into the business to grab a large part of the market. The subordinate also reported that the newly discovered excavation sites are being bought up too quickly, leaving them with nothing. But Black Panther doesn't worry about excuses, he just wants results. And if his subordinates don't fix this, heads are going to roll. Back with the cosplay girl, our guy had some good news to share. It seems that the gang of lenders is really suffering and can no longer keep up with them. Our protagonist made a smart strategic move that forced them to impulsively start buying portals, because they can't afford to lose all their profits, and there is an unwritten rule among all miners. Those who work directly in the extraction always keep valuable objects to sell them and get extra money. They take advantage of this by taking out the contraband items on their equipment. In the past, the Black Panther gang had mercenaries and spies to find potential targets to rob. As everything happens in the shadows, no one reports it to the authorities. If the gang of lenders loses this method of exploiting the trade, they will be in serious trouble. After hearing all this, the cosplay girl was still quite confused. She is too pure and doesn't really know how crime really works, but our protagonist knows better. All the dimensions I had recently visited were useless, so she opened a portal right in front of her. I had already bookmarked all the interesting portals to explore in the future, and now he can move between them whenever he wants. All you need to do is keep an eye on those that were bought by the gangs of moneylenders. Finally, the girl realized that our protagonist's plan is brilliant. He made it very clear that he has no interest in sharing his skill with too many people, so she should carefully choose reliable individuals who can be at her disposal. Excited, the cosplay girl said that she wanted to accompany our guy because she loves this kind of justice. After all, she is a spoiled rich girl. And social justice is pretty much what drives the girls in her social circle. Our protagonist, a former poor guy, dedicated a mocking smile to him. Even so, he is going to take advantage of his determination so that together they can destroy their enemies. Unfortunately, this is where we come to the last published chapter of this story. At least until the time of writing this script. A small truck drives inside the mine. Corrupt workers are inside, eager to smuggle out the objects they collected. But his path is suddenly blocked by a rock that appears out of nowhere. The poor driver didn't even notice what was going on. And when he finally realized that the road was blocked, he panicked. He's clearly never heard of defensive driving. Immediately, the entire road was sealed off, with rock fragments threatening to crush the truck. Workers panic because they know their lives are worth more than the burden. Due to this sudden intervention, the truck crashed into a wall. The men jumped outside, worried about the valuable cargo they were carrying. Just at that moment, a mercenary with a horrible haircut appeared, telling them that the cargo was still intact. But soon these poor background characters are going to find their doom, because this mercenary is about to attack. Helpless workers start running, knowing that they can't do anything against an awakened of this level. But this violent man is eager to unleash his cruelty on them. Our protagonist, who had been watching everything, decided that he was going to play a little with this guy. Using Shadow Step, he suddenly appeared behind him. The mercenary, now completely enraged, had no idea where that person had come from, and she swore she'd make him pay for ruining her fun. Our protagonist charged against the thief because he can't stand people who steal from others. The mercenary quickly realized that his opponent was extremely fast and that he would have to defend himself or risk losing his teeth. But our protagonist is absurdly fast. Basically, the Usain Bolt of beatings. After grabbing the villain's face, he smashed it directly into a huge rock wall. After demonstrating his physical superiority, he asked her who she was. Trying to intimidate him, the man claimed that he was connected with powerful people. It was then that our protagonist revealed that he had already captured the mercenary's allies, who were of category. Seeing this, the mercenary became completely enraged. The cosplay girl, who was already losing patience, asked if they were just going to kill all those men now. But our protagonist said that killing ends things too quickly. He prefers to have a little fun first. He had a much better idea, channeling dark energy in his hand. He squeezed the mercenary's skull hard. Now it was time for a little interrogation. This guy was going to tell you everything he knew about Black Panther. Otherwise, I was going to be in serious trouble. He was also ordered to tell his boss that the ones responsible for this attack were the Shadow faction. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Black Panther found his subordinates completely beaten and shattered. I couldn't believe that this rival faction had grown so much in such a short time. His subordinate explained that the situation was even worse. Those who had been defeated suffered serious injuries and would take at least 6 months to fully recover. That meant that a ridiculous amount of money would have to be spent. While they were still discussing this at the hospital, he informed Black Panther that 2 other teams had also been completely wiped out. Furious, Black Panther demanded to know who was responsible for all this. That's when he discovered that he was our protagonist. That revelation only made him even angrier. I couldn't believe that our protagonist moved between portals with such speed. But against his expectations, his subordinate showed him a video that proved without a doubt that he was our protagonist. In the recording, you could see our guy brutally beating the men of Black Panther to a pulp. And it was obvious that he had done it on purpose. He even noticed the hidden camera and used it to send a direct message to Black Panther, telling him to come and take care of this personally. After all, the medical bills of all those injured subordinates must already be costing a fortune. Provoked to his limit, Black Panther crushed the tablet in his hands and made a promise. He was going to kill our protagonist, or at least he will try to do so. When our guy explains that during his last investigations, he found some Black Panther mobsters near those buildings and that he believes that very soon Black Panther himself will be involved in the next crimes, the Chica immediately realizes that our protagonist wants to loot the place while the mafiosi are get out. And that's exactly what our genius plans to do. While admiring the area, he notices that his phone is ringing. They inform him that Black Panther has just left for the portal of Dimension Number 3, which is perfect because now he will have a lot of time. As expected, Black Panther will be out for quite some time. But since our guy is cautious, he's going to annoy that asshole just enough to give his friend the time she needs to loot everything. Hearing this plan, she gets scared because she knows that Black Panther is B rank and that our guy might need help. But he makes it clear that it will not be necessary. He has no intention of getting into a direct fight. And even if things get really dangerous, you can just open a portal and leave. With that in mind, the girl wishes him good luck. In that other dimension, Black Panther thinks that today is his lucky day because the loot in that place is extremely valuable. One of his lackeys is impressed by the presence of Black Panther, saying that as soon as he appeared, our protagonist was scared and did not interfere in anything. To that mafioso, minors are just garbage, and even with the help of C-rank people they couldn't do anything. But after saying that, he suddenly feels a malicious presence. Black Panther immediately looks back, wanting to know who arrived. One of his subordinates is already being strangled. And our guy is impressed by the senses of someone who is rank B. As several background characters line up behind Black Panther to take a beating, our protagonist asks why they are so tense. If he is just a minor, the poor guy who is being strangled is begging to be saved. And our guy says nobody move, or else this extra could end up in serious trouble. Showing how deeply connected the mafia is, Pantera Negra not only ignores the warning, but also attacks his own subordinate. After being hit by the flames, the poor guy turns into a human kebab, which greatly amuses our protagonist. They soon notice that our protagonist has disappeared. He used his shadow movement to appear behind all of them, impressed by the gangster's lack of mercy. That only further angers the man who is now throwing fireballs at our guy. But he quickly realizes that this strategy is stupid, because he is only hitting his own subordinates, who are now not only going bald, but also end up with third-degree burn. Our protagonist says that being a servant of that mafioso is really dangerous, but Black Panther has already agreed to lose a few men just to defeat our protagonist. Concentrating his power more and more, he wants to see if our boy can dodge his tornado of flames. And just as the name implies, a gigantic fire tornado appears, plunging all the extras into complete despair. Idiots run around with their bodies glowing red, and only our protagonist Giga Chad remains standing. But the moment he manages to use his shadow movement, he escapes too. This only angers Black Panther even more, because in his mind, our guy only manages to escape by hiding. But the truth is that he does not want to underestimate his enemy. That's why planning is absolutely necessary. And now he wants to see what kind of expression that asshole will have when he returns to Earth. Screams break out inside the warehouse. Some idiots say they were victims of a robbery, carried out by the team of our protagonist, and that those lackeys couldn't do anything. Upon learning how much he lost, Black Panther is completely furious. He decides to burn his own subordinates. Now he realizes that the cosplay girl has many allies. Driven by a hatred that only capitalism can create, he promises that his revenge will be extremely cruel. Black Panther tries to argue with his boss since he lost billions in this little trick, but he doesn't get any support. It could start a war between two very influential families. At the moment, the cosplay girl is completely out of reach. Not to mention that they are at a critical stage of the experiment they are working on. So Black Panther needs to control his own impulses. But he says that he cannot stand this situation, and that he is ready to kill our protagonist and his little girlfriend. And after that he will leave the city himself. But then he realizes that he was too insolent with his boss. That mustachioed old man has made pacts with all kinds of evil entities, and he's ready to shut Black Panther up right there, making him bite the dust from the wrong side of the earth. Black Panther has to kneel down because he ended up tearing part of his underwear. The old man tells him not to worry about such a small amount of money, because once his experiment succeeds, he promises to help him get revenge. As the boss walks away, Black Panther thinks that he has never been humiliated like this in his entire life. Now he is determined to take on this task personally. Our protagonist has to pay for what he has done. Inside her family's car, the cosplay girl tells one of the extras that our protagonist is really very smart. Since the poor guy doesn't get paid to listen to this kind of stuff, he asks the driver to hurry up, because the young woman next to him clearly misses her boyfriend. She is immediately embarrassed, as she never said she missed him, but that bodyguard has had enough. He has heard the name of our protagonist 24 times that day. While they are talking, the extra notices that a truck is heading straight towards them. The poor guy tries to react quickly to prevent something worse from happening to the person who pays his salary. Using all his supreme abilities, he manages to pull both of them out of the car through the window, avoiding the brunt of the collision. Due to the force of the impact, the flammable material inside the truck begins to spill. It doesn't take long before a fire starts. They watch in amazement the destruction caused by that truck. At that moment, the cosplay girl perceives the presence of someone absolutely despicable. Black Panther has arrived with his lackeys. His bodyguard immediately orders everyone to protect the young woman. Filled with the confidence of someone who grew up in a protective social bubble, Cosplay says that Black Panther is ignoring reality, because with so few lackeys she won't be able to do anything. The moment she says that, she starts to feel something strange. Now he has a bad headache, and his bodyguard realizes that something is very wrong with this water. Black Panther's malicious gaze makes it clear that he planned everything that is happening right now. What is falling from the sky is not an ordinary liquid, it is spider venom. Strong enough to knock even someone from class unconscious in a matter of hours. The bodyguard tells the young woman to run, and Black Panther is already ready to attack. Grabbing the poor extra by the collar, he sees how loyal this man is. And now he's going to turn it into a flaming popsicle stick. The spoiled girl watches everything completely helplessly. Meanwhile, our protagonist lives quietly, perfecting his techniques during a training session. He is preparing to master the shadow step, going through all those obstacles like lightning, and leaving only several cuts in his path. Our guy manages to completely cut out those wooden objects. The entity that lives in his heart is enchanted. By noticing that our protagonist has become stronger, but our guy already knows that he is at least rank C. That's when he realizes that his friend is calling him, and the shadow entity makes it clear that our guy may be rank C, but he is much stronger than average. After looking at his phone, our protagonist throws his knife on the floor, because he realizes that his dear friend is with someone absolutely despicable. Unfortunately, the spoiled girl has just been captured. Full of anger towards Black Panther, our protagonist asks if he's really sure what he's doing, because that idiot clearly doesn't understand the consequences. Trying to intimidate him, the mobster says he can do whatever he wants with that girl. And now it gives you two options. The first is to pay a small sum of 10 billion, and the second is to see live everything he plans to do to that spoiled girl. Our protagonist agrees to deliver the money and wants to know where he should deliver it. Black Panther tells him to meet at the warehouse that was robbed, but our protagonist must go alone. Knowing how strong he is currently, the shadow entity strongly advises him not to die, because that would be quite problematic. But our protagonist is not going to abandon his companions. That's against their principles. And he also doesn't know who is really going to die today. Following the rules of the mafioso, our protagonist goes to meet him. Black Panther wants to know where the money is, but our protagonist wants to see his ally first. Willing to cooperate, Black Panther orders the spoiled girl to be brought in. That immediately worries our protagonist because a crane starts to move. The poor girl is hanging helpless, unable to speak because she is gagged. Seeing that at least he is still alive, our protagonist opens his storage space, revealing a large amount of money requested by the mafioso. His lackeys check to make sure it's real, and are happy to confirm that it is. Now that the exchange is done, the mafioso must free the girl. But now that he has received his payment, being the extra that he is, he no longer intends to cooperate. And our protagonist cannot be left alive. Knowing that he would be betrayed in this deal, our protagonist reveals a surprise. Activate a device and the whole stack of money starts to glow, exploding right in front of those idiots. A cloud of smoke rises and Black Panther has no idea where our protagonist could be. But he soon discovers it as he is almost hit by its blade. After dodging the attack, Black Panther tries to use his flames to fight. But our protagonist is surprised at how stupid he is because the guy has just produced fire in a highly polluted air, causing another uncontrolled explosion. This time the flames are much bigger, almost reaching the body of the spoiled girl. She watches everything carefully, worried about our guy. Before she can figure out what happened, someone manages to cut the rope that was tying her. He thinks he's about to crash to the ground, but when he opens his eyes, he realizes he's safe. She is in the arms of our protagonist, and he is riding a dragon. The two are about to leave through a dimensional portal, which leaves Black Panther absolutely furious. He believes that once he manages to capture our boy, everything will be his. But half of his lackeys were injured in the process. Still, he calls the remaining half to be followed to that unknown portal. After going through the door, the crowd of idiots tries to chase after our protagonist. They were tricked into entering a huge castle, and the spoiled girl is worried about that. But our protagonist plans to use the presence of all those extras to solve a problem for him. Then he asks the girl to hide next to the dragon because our guy wants to have some fun. As soon as he jumps from the creature, he assures him that nothing bad will happen to him. The shadow entity immediately realizes that he is trying to use those people to get to the second floor, and that is exactly what he intends. The entity is surprised that our guy manages to exploit the rules in this way, and our protagonist is focused on the reward he will get. An armor capable of withstanding a rank attacks. Now that he is waiting for the idiots to arrive, he has to defend himself from a fire attack. He quickly notices that his enemies are being very cautious. Black Panther thinks he has our protagonist completely cornered. But for our boy, there is no reason to run or escape. He's already rescued the spoiled girl, all that's left now is fun. Ready to use your shadow powers once more. He is eager to discover the limits of his own strength. For Black Panther, this poor kid must have lost his mind. He immediately encourages his extras by saying that our guy is completely alone. Once they finish it, they can enjoy the woman he saved. Our protagonist knows that he does not have the advantage in numbers, but there are many ways to overcome them. It's time for you to get to know the creatures inside this place. Behind him, a huge door opens, revealing hungry and dangerous eyes. It's time to get these idiots to help him clean that floor. After seeing those creatures, Black Panther and his men are terrified. Now they need to be extremely careful because otherwise their deaths will be agonizing. Black Panther maintains concentration by summoning flames to fight the first monster. He tries to push the creature back with all his strength. It seems that his flames really made some difference. The one who is enjoying all this fight is our young protagonist. Noticing that his enemies are doing their best to survive, he now manipulates their shadows to create a weapon. Forming a huge warhammer in his hands, ready to draw the creature's attention to his enemy. He hits the fireball with all the force he has. At the moment of impact, he realizes how impressive that force is and understands that he must be careful. Meanwhile, the other idiots need to keep fighting for their lives too. After throwing that powerful punch, our guy needs to catch his breath for a moment. Black Panther notices that the boy will not be able to block many more of his attacks, which is very interesting to him. But our protagonist just wanted to block the first one, hinting that his enemy should look around. It is then that Black Panther finally understands that he is completely surrounded by threatening creatures. This only angers him even more, and with the monsters completely entertained, our protagonist is free to continue on his way. It is at that moment that the villain realizes that he has been completely deceived by our guy. His anger grows even more, and now he is engulfed in flames, ready to destroy everything. He launches a massive attack on the monster in front of him. But he soon realizes that he will have to repeat it many more times. He swears that he will end up with our protagonist, no matter what. Finally, our boy manages to advance deeper into the castle. And he wants to know if the shadow entity is lying. Because an armor capable of withstanding a rank attacks sounds too good to be true. The entity says he has no reason to lie. And it seems that something suddenly appears in his way. Standing in front of them is the butler of that floor, who seems to have been defeated by time itself. The entity wants our protagonist to give him a proper funeral once everything is over. Expressing his gratitude after the guy accepts. While observing that figure, the entity remains silent for a few seconds. Then he asks her to keep moving forward because the armor is right in front. Once again, our protagonist detects something. The armor you've been looking for floats in the air. It is the shadow armor that the entity spoke about. He is stunned by his appearance, while the entity can't help but think that if our guy's shadow reinforcement was already at level 3, everything would be different. Still, she is eager to see what our protagonist will be able to do with this team. Only then our guy realizes that the entity is too quiet. He tells him to hurry up and claim his reward. But he wants to know why the entity is becoming more emotional with every passing second. Still, he advances towards the armor. But before he can touch her, the armor grabs him by the neck. He says it's been a long time, and he thought his master would never come back. Now our protagonist is terrified because he has no idea what's going on. The steward of that place has manifested himself inside the armor, and he knows that his master is extremely powerful, and now he is forced to parasitize a ridiculous human. Worried about what might happen to her vassal, the shadow entity orders the armor to stop immediately, making it clear that this is an order. For a moment, the armor wonders if this is really happening. He acknowledges that his master no longer has the right to issue such an order. His soul wandered inside that armor just to prolong his life. What has returned is only a fragment of the soul of its former master. And now he decides that he will refine it, reaching level 3 of shadow strengthening, and turning that armor into a vessel for his own soul. With his neck being squeezed tighter and tighter, our guy starts to panic. Now that they are communicating through the mind, our protagonist asks if he could win, if he handed over control of his body to the entity. The entity is stunned, noticing that our guy is not afraid to completely lose control. He says that the situation is too serious for jokes, and that if the entity could really take control so easily, he would not have returned the body to him last time. And it seems that this is true. Now both are working as if they were one. The eyes of our protagonist shine violently. It's time to show this armor who's boss. But the artifact knows that in the current state, its former master's power is only at rank A, not enough to intimidate. Still, he says it's more than enough to beat up this rebellious vassal. And the armor is stunned to realize that he really controls the domain of the shadows. Then, they also use the mastery of shadows against armor. But the armor believes that it is just a bluff, since she was never trained to fully use that technique. That's when the entity admits that sometimes it needs to restrain itself. Still, the armor believes it can win and lunges forward, convinced that the body it is using now is more than enough to ensure victory. Our protagonist waits patiently for the sword to come closer. He dodges at the last second and manages to get behind his opponent. This terrifies the armor because he has no idea what technique he just used. Without wasting time, our protagonist begins to attack as well. That's when the armor realizes that they won't be able to maintain this transformation for long. Our boy's body is under enormous pressure, but he assures the entity that he can continue for a few more minutes. The armor also realizes that those attacks are not enough to break through its defense. That's why the entity decides to use brute force in its purest form, hitting the enemy with his bare hands. This overwhelming power finally makes the armor hesitate. The blow completely destroys the sword she was using, forcing her to block with her arms. After that, the entity notices that he just needs to push a little more to expel the soul of his former subordinate. But using so much force is already exhausting our protagonist. He insists that he can resist just a little longer. But the entity knows that if it exceeds its limits, the boy's soul will be burned and consumed. Due to that brief hesitation, the soul bound to the armor manages to return to it. Upon regaining his power, the armor mocks his former master, saying that he has become pathetic. These insults infuriate the entity even more, and now it must defend itself from a brutal attack. The former vassal is ready to end the battle this very instant. As the fight becomes more intense, the entity takes full control, and even manifests his mask. He materializes in front of his former servant, who now believes he has the upper hand. He uses his energy to get our guy. The entity must admit that it never imagined having problems with a former subordinate. Increasingly confident, the former footman believes that this time, he will fully return to life. My God, only now it becomes clear. The dark entity and our protagonist have separated. It must be some kind of insane strategy because now our guy is completely alone. Given the situation, the dark entity gives him sincere advice, tells him to run away. But our protagonist decides to completely ignore the danger and charges against the armor. She does not feel even minimally threatened by him. While one worries about his soul being consumed for that armor, our protagonist is nothing more than an ant trying the impossible. And that's why he is brutally beaten. Our boy is spitting up a lot of blood. The dark entity reminds him that he is only C rank, and it's time to escape before things get worse. Now our protagonist has a very intimate moment and decides to open his heart. He says he was treated like a slave from the beginning, forced by the entity to fight in other dimensions and level up, forced to obey all the orders of that entity. Now that they are separated, running away or not is a decision that belongs only to him. And with the courage burning inside, our boy charges again. As he strikes his enemy, he realizes that he used to rely on shadow energy to fight. But now he himself can contribute to bringing down this traitor. The armor is simply waiting to see how much our guy's body can withstand, since to her he is nothing but a fool. Pushing beyond his limits, our protagonist says that it's up to him to decide what's going to happen. And this time, he is moving forward with absolute determination. Only then do you notice that your body is melting, falling apart. Even worse, it's as if he's turning into shadows, being consumed by them. Watching carefully, the treacherous subordinate is sure that our protagonist is a complete idiot. He says that for a former master he chose someone exceptionally stupid. Even the shadow entity is now fading away, begging our boy not to try harder. Apparently, they are both being sucked into the cursed armor, which is now smiling like a villain, ready to come back to life at last. All that remains of his former enemies is nothing more than a stain on the ground. However, that stain begins to grow, spreading all over the place. That's when the villain realizes that he messed with something extremely dangerous, something called the author's will to make the protagonist win. He knows that technique very well. It is the eternal night, born from the domain of the shadows. That should be completely impossible because the energy was not completely refined, and the miserable soul does not even notice that our protagonist appears behind him. He is taken completely by surprise when he hears our boy's warning. He already told her that this was going to happen, and now it will be deleted one way or another. The armor is now pathetic, terrified by the apparition in front of it. After trying to cut our protagonist, he realizes that his attacks are useless. Our protagonist has awakened interesting abilities. Within the domain of the shadows, he can alter his physical form, enhance all his shadow attributes, and the targets he defeats are converted into energy. It is then that the armor realizes that our protagonist is already on the 3rd level. And now the AliExpress version of solo leveling finally understands where the shadow energy comes from, absorbing souls. That's why the armor is absolutely horrified by its current power. And our protagonist wants to know what this poor soul plans to do after being kicked out of the armor. He hits her with a devastating attack. Terrified, the traitor does his best to dodge. But our protagonist is already behind him, ready to expel the parasite from his new armor. And I better do it right now. After hitting the armor with everything he has, the intruder is thrown to the ground. Even so, his strength is still not enough to defeat, since that armor withstands a rank hits. If our protagonist can't break the armor, he will try something else. The intruder thinks that our guy is just being reckless, but every time he tries to hit, his attacks reach nothing but air. Now our protagonist begins to turn into shadows and slowly enters inside the armor, leaving his enemy completely in shock. He tries to purge the presence of this invader, but little by little, the soul that possessed the armor is expelled, thrown completely out. At that moment, the intruder realizes that he no longer has the protection of the device. Finally, our protagonist understands why he was hiding inside her. The armor absorbs shadow energy to compensate for the damage the soul receives. And now that he is helpless, the intruder will only become weaker. Believing that he still has some strategic advantage, he tries to retreat. But our protagonist does not allow it. With his chains, he completely immobilizes his opponent. Since that dimension is linked to his soul, our protagonist could get hurt if he attacks him. But that threat has no effect. Our boy knows that souls are raw material for shadow energy. And now that the traitor has completely lost the protection of the armor, he is being consumed. The one who does this is the shadow entity. Finally, this enemy becomes food for the growth of our boy. In his last moments, the shadow entity says that his former servant underestimated our protagonist's hunger for power. Knowing that his end is near, the former servant says that the next one to be absorbed by this greedy boy will be the shadow entity itself. He says that no living being can withstand the test of desire. Now that our protagonist's power has increased, it seems that he is being put to the test. He starts screaming like a Dragon Ball character. That's when the shadow entity notices something. Our protagonist has finally reached the B rank, and is much stronger than before. He immediately uses his power to interfere with the sky above them. His energy rises towards the shadow entity, and our protagonist declares that now it's his turn. The shadow entity is terrified, while our protagonist smiles with total confidence. He manages to completely immobilize his former mentor. By manipulating the armor, he also understands how that soul managed to stay alive. Our protagonist places the armor on the shadow entity so that it becomes his new body. This result surprises the entity, since it never expected something so considerate from our guy. He says that his mentor has a very dark personality, and complains that if he absorbed it, it would surely cause stomach problems. And besides, that armor is huge and ugly. He refuses to use it no matter what. Let's be honest, anyone who has read that masterpiece called Solo Leveling Can't help but see the reference now that the shadow entity is equipped with an armor. Back in the previous room of the castle, Black Panther's subordinates are having a very bad time. But he doesn't care about their lives, all he wants is revenge. He even burns one of his own lackeys just to defeat the creature in front of him. Surrounded by weaklings, he refuses to waste time saving that kind of trash. That's when Black Panther notices someone approaching. He is our protagonist accompanied by the shadow entity. And he is surprised that Black Panther has survived so long. The moment he sees our protagonist, the idiot becomes enraged. Without thinking twice, he launches into the attack. But the shadow entity is much stronger than before. With just a movement of his eyes, he repels the body of that useless man. It is then that Black Panther realizes that he is facing a being of rank. Fighting against our protagonist was bad enough, but now that he has help, the situation is desperate. Our protagonist asks the entity if joining the fight would be too humiliating, not to mention that Black Panther would be an excellent training session. The criminal can't believe what he just heard, and gets even angrier. He thinks he just needs a good chance to defeat our protagonist. But without hesitation, our guy is already using the domain of shadows. Unfortunately, for this poor soul, he does not realize that our boy is no longer D rank. He is moving straight towards his own destruction. Our protagonist lunges at him, full of rage, and then hits the idiot with full force in the stomach. And if I felt like going to the bathroom earlier, it definitely already happened now. Still trying to recover from the damage, the criminal sees that our protagonist has not stopped attacking. Feeling that he has been insulted, he decides to use his llamas as well. But that doesn't scare our guy at all. They both release their energy to the fullest, but all Black Panther manages to gain is another beating. That's when he notices that our protagonist has already reached the B rank, and it happened too fast. Our guy explains that he got a little help from a few idiots who decided to make his life more difficult. Realizing that our protagonist has become much stronger, Black Panther gets even angrier. He throws himself forward for another attack, stating that nothing will change the outcome of this battle, because he believes that his strength is far superior to that of our guy. He launches several attacks, but none of them manage to reach our protagonist. Watching the fight closely, the shadow entity tells our boy that within the shadow domain, he does not need to use his own energy. He can actually command and use the energy around him, turning the enemy's own power against him. That is the true essence of darkness. Our guy says he understands the message, but what he's really not used to is the entity acting like an excellent teacher. That's genuinely amazing. Black Panther hears this and says that our guy is not a genius capable of learning things in real time, but our protagonist is already giving orders to the energy that surrounds him, making it obey his commands. Before being hit by Black Panther's flames, he forms a large protective barrier of shadow energy. This leaves his opponent completely speechless. Feeling the true power to flow through him, our protagonist must admit that the feeling is addictive. He then sends a huge burst of energy towards his enemy, elusive Black Panther, but he is sure that if he had not done it, that would have been the last moment of his life. He throws himself forward, desperately trying to shorten the distance, convinced that since he reacted faster than the explosion, he now has a chance to counterattack. But our protagonist was already waiting for such a reckless approach, and is ready to inflict pain. The previous attack was just a decoy to lure him directly into suffering. Once again, our protagonist sends Black Panther flying. While the idiot struggles to stand up, he tries to understand how this is happening. The guy uses skill after skill, and still his energy does not run out. On the contrary, he is clearly getting stronger. Now our protagonist calmly walks towards his prey, saying that if that's all he has, he's disappointed. It's time to end this fight. Completely furious, and with nothing to lose, Black Panther swears that even if he dies, he will take our boy with him. But our protagonist is completely protected by the armor of the script. While they exchange blows, there is no sign of any exhaustion in our guy. Finally, he delivers several precise blows with his shadow blade, directly piercing his opponent's body, and taking some limbs with him. To be more specific, both arms of Black Panther. It takes a moment for the villain's nervous system to understand what just happened, and maybe he'll never be able to clean himself up again. Black Panther falls to his knees trying to understand what his life will be like from now on. Then, he feels a dark and malicious energy approaching the back of his neck. He can't even put his hands up to say he's giving up. Now he says that if our guy has enough courage, he will do what needs to be done. But our protagonist believes that death is too mild a punishment for people like him. Right now, this paperweight is worth more alive than dead. The shadow entity is curious about that decision, and wants to know why this man's life should be spared. Our guy says he wants more information about the mustachioed old man, but Black Panther insists that even death wouldn't make him come back to life. Even so, our protagonist is sure that the spoiled girl's family has ways to make him confess something. Hearing that threat, Black Panther begs to be released. Otherwise, he will be married by the corporate group of the mustachioed old man. But our guy, already out of patience, tells him to shut up using his shadows. He says being hunted is not a problem. In fact, he's going to hunt them all down. The shadow entity guarantees that it can take care of any rank hunter, considering it its way of paying our guy. But until they know exactly who was involved in what happened with their parents, they should be very cautious. And when it comes to revenge, our guy, he knows it's much better to handle it personally. Back in the real world, inside a military base, several people gather, waiting for the general's arrival. Inside an office, some men watch the troops on the move, and one asks if the mayor knows anything. Mayor Calvo says he doesn't know anything. Apparently, he is ignored by people with healthy hairlines. An old man is very well connected with them. The father of the spoiled girl is being informed about the rescue of his daughter, and about everything that Black Panther did. He immediately gets furious, telling the mayor that he has no idea what is motivating the army. Then he approaches another executive in the room, telling him that he needs to learn to control. Will control your dog or make sure he learns to behave properly. The executive plays the fool, claiming that he does not know what the old man is talking about. The father says he hopes that is true, because otherwise he will be added to his list of people who will also suffer. Now the two get caught up in an ego competition to see who is stronger. Strong. And judging by the mayor's smile, he's supporting violence. Another man enters the room, and seeing how excited they are, he is relieved. He tells them to use that force in the right place, because a bigger disaster is coming. This is the military commander, and he brought all these men together for something much more serious. Since he's not an academic, he asks the guy with glasses next to him to explain. The scientist explains that the rank fighters reached that power during the battle 10 years ago. And everyone knows how powerful the monsters of that rank and above are. They do not know why the second opening appeared and disappeared so quickly. But for the last 10 years, they have been monitoring everything. All the radiation fluctuations related to that event. 5 years ago, the same pattern reappeared and has been increasing in frequency over time. In the last 3 months, it coincides perfectly with the event of 10 years ago. Hearing this, all the men are shocked and terrified. That's when the bald mayor asks the general a question. He wants to know if they are going to face the same event again. And that's exactly what the general confirms. There will be a second dimensional opening. Countless shadow creatures are eager to enter the earth and have some fun. Now everyone has to worry about this possible opening, because once it happens, chaos will take over everything. The spoiled girl's father makes it very clear that he does not care about any of that, as long as certain people stop acting behind his back. But the general emphasizes that the situation is extraordinary. And if any of those men decide to cause problems, he will personally take exceptional measures to deal with them. He also says that the father of the spoiled girl, you must leave with him now because you will receive a full explanation about the current situation. After getting into the car, they finally drive off, leaving the bald man and his friend behind. The bald man notices that the general doesn't even pretend anymore. The way she treats him, it's like the spoiled girl's father practically belongs to the army. And he is sure that the hostility directed at his friend was caused by the Black Panther incident, so he suggests to the man to keep quiet for a while. But even in front of the bald man, this executive in a suit still acts as if he doesn't know anything. Either way, the bald man recommends his friend to take a look at the latest news. Far away, in a corporate building, someone is informing the mustachioed old man about the situation. On the other end of the phone, someone is furious with him. Until now, they had ignored his ties to Black Panther, but a major crime has just happened in the city, as that man tried to kidnap the daughter of that influential old man with hair. The story is the only thing that appears on all the news channels, and the man in the suit hopes the old mustachioed man isn't involved. Completely irritated, he says that it was just a small problem, and that he would never act without contacting his partner. But the other person is still furious about the result, ordering the mustachioed man to get forgiveness from that family. Cut all ties with the Black Panther gang, otherwise, your partner will no longer protect you. After finishing the call, the mustachioed old man becomes enraged by the consequences of that reckless maneuver. The spoiled girl is now in the hospital waiting for her bodyguard to recover from her injuries. According to the doctor who treated him, everything will be fine. While they are there, an unexpected visitor appears. It's the mustachioed old man. Acting fake and polite, he says he is relieved that everyone is safe. He never imagined that Black Panther would do something like that. Our protagonist did not expect to see him there. And it is doubtful that this old man did not know exactly what Black Panther was planning to do, trying to justify himself. The mustachioed man says that this criminal was only a business partner, and that now he will cut ties with all criminals and even help hunt down the remaining ones. Our protagonist wants to know what those words really mean, It sounds like he sacrificed a pawn to save the king. Or offended, the mustachioed old man says that our guy should know his own limits, because what he stole from Black Panther is enough to live luxuriously for the rest of his life. But our guy gets right to the point. These material goods are just the beginning. What he really wants is that old man's head. The mustachioed man immediately looks at the spoiled girl, wondering if that is also the position of his family. But after almost dying and being kidnapped, she suggests that he draw his own conclusions. It doesn't take long for him to realize that there's nothing left to discuss anymore. He tells our protagonist that he belongs to a very powerful corporation, and that without proof, he will never be touched by insects. Our guy tells him that he better pray that Black Panther never shows up again. Otherwise, it will become your worst nightmare. In a mysterious place, the members of this gang are being subjected to experiments, being injected with something called the blood of God. The poor guys are extremely worried because they have no idea what kind of drug that is, but doctors administer it anyway. The first test subject seems to be going through a very dangerous transformation. His body suddenly becomes incredibly strong, breaking all the bonds that were holding him down. Now these people are completely out of control. Talking on the phone, the mustachioed old man wants to know what the news will report the next day. Maybe they say it was a great act of revenge, or that the band members lost control after using a banned drug. Either way, he thinks it will be very interesting. Traveling with the general, the old man with hair wants to know why the general is so eager to meet our protagonist. The truth is that over the past month, our guy has made enormous progress and has even sold valuable items. So the general is very curious about him. While looking out the car window, the general sees someone moving. Apparently he's not the only one in a hurry to meet our protagonist. The old man explains that regarding the weapons he bought from him, they did not seem special because of their materials. But the general disagrees, saying that his combat performance is exceptional. That seems to catch the old man's interest. The general mocks him by saying that age must have damaged the sharp instincts he had when he was younger. Suddenly, all the cars have to stop because a completely deranged person plants himself right in front of them. It is our protagonist personally greeting the general, surprised to receive such important visitors. But the general is very friendly with our guy and enjoys being recognized instantly. The two begin to exchange compliments that only Koreans know how to do. And the general asks if he is not going to be invited for a cup of tea. Our protagonist says that that would actually be great, but that the timing is a bit inconvenient. The general approaches with a dark expression and says that his men will take care of the people outside. But our protagonist does not understand what he means. He finally decides to invite his guests in. Gathered in the room, an extra soldier says that the transmission is already fully connected. But our protagonist warns them that he does not feel anyone powerful outside. There is no way that simple soldiers can do anything. The general agrees with him, but he is truly surprised by how calm our guy is. While the boy assumes that the general is about to waste the lives of his men, still, the defensive operation is initiated. The strike squad is already outside, armed with their flame-spitting toys. The general observes everything through the transmission. Our protagonist is shocked. The lackeys he just beat up have already recovered their bones. And they all look extremely strange. The shadow entity watches carefully and seems to recognize what has happened. And that terrifies him because that thing shouldn't exist in this world. The soldiers start shooting at the enemies. Some extras are already sent to the wonderful world of ideas, but several are still alive. One of these creatures is about to annihilate the soldiers by launching a huge attack on them. One of the poor soldiers asks for drone support. High-tech drones appear on the battlefield. They are machines capable of producing extremely effective barriers, completely covering the area where the soldiers are positioned. Still, the power of that gangster turns out to be surprisingly strong, causing massive destruction. The soldiers now have to resume their attack before they fall victim to another blow like that. They put their flame-spitting toys to work, turning that cursed extra into Swiss cheese. By showing how well coordinated they are, they maintain the formation and move towards the goal. Our protagonist is amazed by that firepower, wondering if they were upgraded using the equipment he provided. Even the old man with the hair wants to confirm if that is the case. And the general confirms it. If they get enough raw materials, things will get even better. Our guy is impressed by the strength of the soldiers. But there is something these men are overlooking. Before he can say what it is, someone breaks his window. Our protagonist realizes that there is an extra very anxious because his life ends in a painful way. Observing the destruction around the window, the general says that whoever did not make it past his men. That one was left specifically for him to take care of using his skills. Our guy gets it right away. They want to see what he's capable of in a real fight. In front of him is another completely out of control lackey who desires nothing but revenge. His expression is dark and empty. Looks like he took enough fentanyl to tranquilize an elephant. Now he is totally unhinged, controlling huge rocks to try to end the life of our protagonist. Throws a sharp stone fragment capable of crushing anyone. Our guy is only sorry for the damage he is going to cause to the property, since it does not even belong to him. His shadow blade touches the block, completely disintegrating it as he lunges towards the enemy. The general is shocked by this show of force. He thinks that our guy should be at least B rank, maybe even higher. The old man with the hair thinks he's exaggerating, but the general tells him to watch carefully because it doesn't even look like our protagonist is using his full potential. The extradicate tries to harden his arms with stone to block the attack. Even so, it absorbs a good amount of the damage of our protagonist. Now our guy wants to know how these extras leveled up so fast. He has no idea what drug they took, but he wouldn't mind having 2 grams for personal research. But the footman does not answer. His mind is completely rotted by drugs, leaving him unable to say anything coherent. Our guy realizes that this substance must be extremely strong. So it's better that it remains illegal. Now the out-of-control extra unleashes his intense power again, screaming that he is no longer a normal human. Moments later, his entire body turns to stone. For our protagonist, that's great. It is easier to be cruel to something that is no longer human. But what he really wants in this fight is to avoid showing all his power in front of those 2 curious old men. Using only the first stage of shadow reinforcement, he believes that it is enough for the situation. And it really is. The stone monster is completely annihilated. The general says that the first reports about our protagonist were exaggerated, but after seeing it with his own eyes, he now believes that those reports fell very short. Our protagonist is sure that receiving a night visit from the general is not because the man wants to help him, and he's absolutely right. The general explains that the equipment his soldiers used was created from the sword that our boy recovered, and he wants more raw material. What they have already obtained has been used in combat, and our protagonist believes that the army could produce such an element by itself. But the general says his biggest problem now is time. You can't give too many details to someone like our protagonist, but a level 2-dimensional portal could appear in the city at any time. And even with all the power the army currently has, they might not be prepared for what's coming. This news is really alarming, and everyone who hears it is immediately worried. But the general puts a hand on the boy's shoulder. He says they need to avoid collateral damage, and that's why he needs more material to equip the army. Our protagonist promises that he will find a way to get it, asking for 3 days before giving an answer. But he can't guarantee that he'll get much. To motivate him even more, the general says that his effort will be rewarded. But he also makes it clear that he can't give her money right now. What he can offer you is a position within the military chain of command. Even arrange a compromise between him and the spoiled girl, which is just as interesting. But our guy thinks that's a little inappropriate. The old man with the hair doesn't like that conversation at all. He is extremely possessive of his daughter. The general then wants to know if our protagonist has no interest in the spoiled girl. And our guy says he can handle that situation personally. Within the shadow dimension, the entity is thinking about the appearance of that portal. The people who tried to kill our protagonist must have received divine blood, and he never imagined that they would find a way to open a portal so quickly. Our protagonist perceives that the entity is furious about the issue, so he starts asking questions. The entity explains that a level 2 portal is not something our protagonist can handle yet. If he wants to stay alive, he needs to stay away from him immediately. But our guy wants to know what's inside a door, so he made his personal demon so irritated. The entity says that there are many A-rank monsters and even some S-rank ones. That's the real danger. After that intense conversation, they return to the military base in the city. Curious about what happened, the general wants the bodies of those idiots to be studied and makes the request directly to the old man with hair. He already knows the tragedy related to the parents of our protagonist, and since the mustachioed man's company is involved, they should compensate the guy somehow. The general is furious with everything he has discovered. He also knows that those assholes were using some kind of drug. At least they managed to capture the Black Panther. The poor guy had to be chained by the legs because he no longer has arms. The general knows that if the mustachioed man is involved, the old man with the hair could also face problems. That's why he suggests leaving everything in the hands of the army. In addition, he wants to do all this so that our protagonist owes him a favor in the future. Within the shadow dimension, our boy is instructed to pass the 3rd test so that his strength increases. The entity knows that surpassing the B rank is not easy, and in the next test he will not level up. You will only receive objects that will help you on your way. Our protagonist asks about those weapons, and the entity makes something very clear: they are inexhaustible. If that's true, our guy wants to know why they keep wasting their time. You need to start the next test immediately. But notice that the shadow entity is a little restless. Then the entity says that he has something to reveal to his disciple. And after that, he will be able to decide whether he wants to continue with the tests. That dimension is a prison much bigger than the Earth, and it has 3 layers. The outer layer contains B-rank creatures. The middle layer contains creatures of rank A and above. And in the center, there are beings whose levels cannot even be classified. The mission of the Shadow Clan is to guard that prison so that none of these creatures escape. If that's really true, our protagonist wants to know why the dimensional portal appeared. Only then does the entity reveal that this is the work of a traitor of his own clan. He allied with some of the most powerful prisoners and started a massive rebellion in that dimension. They tried to take control of the door and escape to other dimensions. The revolt got completely out of control. So the entity had no choice but to close the door by force and wait for reinforcements. But after tens of thousands of years, no one ever came. And he no longer has the strength to keep the seal. 10 years ago, the portal was broken for the first time. Now our protagonist realizes that there is a direct connection between that prison, the test tower, and the Earth. Once he passes the 3rd test, he will become a member of the Shadow Clan. And he will automatically become an enemy of every creature inside that prison. He never imagined that the shadow entity was worried about this. When the door is broken, if it does not have the clan symbol, it will not be a priority target. You will be able to hide and watch as the city is destroyed from a safe distance. If that is what the entity suggests, our guy wants to complete the 3rd test immediately. Even if he is not a saint, he is not a coward who will remain quietly waiting for his own death. He prefers to move forward. The shadow entity has no face, but he definitely just smiled. If this human is so arrogant, then the entity will be arrogant to him. Our protagonist finally enters the dimension of the 3rd test. The company warns that the place is dangerous. Fragments of the souls of fallen heroes of his clan are found here. Only with his recognition will he gain control of the tower. And with that he will get his 2nd skill. This part really interests our guy. He wants to know what kind of skill it is. The entity explains that it comes after the refinement of the soul, and that awakenings are unique for each person. The entity itself gained the ability to create clones. Even if his main body is destroyed, his consciousness will not disappear as long as a clone exists. Our guy is curious about what happened to the original body. Original from his mentor. And the entity is not sure. It may still exist or it may have turned to dust over time. But she urges him to hurry up because she is eager to see what kind of skill he will awaken through this test. She thinks to herself that this brat has never let her down, and that maybe he will awaken a completely different power in the shadow. Our boy walks to the center. Countless fragments of soul float around him. He reaches out to touch some of them, trying to understand what they might do. The moment he comes into contact with the souls, something completely different happens. Even if no one remembers that clan, they must defend it, no matter what. And now our boy is witnessing memories of the past. Among the memories, there is a seriously injured warrior who recognizes the limits of his own strength, calling himself weak. But he was never a coward in life. He detonates his own body. His companions throw themselves into combat. Not a single one of these shadow beings will allow the prisoners to escape. Our boy is overwhelmed by these brutal and violent memories, witnessing everything as if he were inside the battlefield. Countless shadow entities are being defeated with terrifying ease. And our guy senses something in that energy. A darker version of himself appears, saying that each of those fallen heroes is very much stronger than him. Weak as he is, he doesn't belong on that battlefield and should leave immediately. Our protagonist knows that he is not really strong, but he also has people he wants to protect, as well as ideals that drive him. The evil version calls him an idiot and tries to attack him. Our guy says if he wants to make fun of him, let him do it. No matter how strong the enemy is, running away will never be an option. Even if his strength is insignificant in the grand scheme of things, he will still do his part. The shadow entity is deeply impressed by the power that is generated from these emotions, and is even more curious about the ability that our protagonist will awaken. Of his internal battle, the evil version claims that he possesses a dangerous amount of confidence. Our guy sees that he is about to be hit by a massive attack. Acting fast, he manages to dodge what could have been fatal. Now he needs to reposition himself and rethink his strategy. The dark version declares that his strength is born from our boy's own fears, that's why he won't be able to resist. That little conviction he has is completely irrelevant, but our protagonist feels that he is not the only one like this. All souls here are the same. That's why he decides that he will keep fighting, because everyone sacrificed to protect his ideals. That was the life they lived. Meanwhile, the enemy in front of him is nothing but his personal demon. After receiving a blow from our protagonist, The evil version begins to dissolve. With his victory secured, our guy says that was nothing more than a bad thought going through his mind. That's all. Finally, the souls of the fallen heroes begin to manifest before him. He gains his second ability, Soul Protection. He still does not know exactly what kind of blessing it is, but it is a commando-type ability. That increases the attack and defense of his followers. An extremely interesting power. The shadow entity says that the boy never ceases to amaze her. It is truly exceptional. Then our protagonist notices the opening of a gigantic portal in front of him. The entity explains that this entrance leads to an alternate dimension, the vault of weapons and medicines of his clan. Our guy is anxious to know what's on the other side. His biggest curiosity is how much matter exists beyond the door. Your mentor is very clear about this. They have enough raw material to fuel a war involving millions of people. And all he's seeing in that dimension is the ore needed to forge his weapons. Our protagonist feels that he has just won the lottery. Everything here is invaluable. His mentor explains that the following levels are simulations of what he has already done, intended to help him refine his skills. Immediately, our protagonist asks what the 6th level of the tower is. But the shadow entity firmly tells him that he is not qualified to know the truth yet, and he hopes he never will be. Our guy doesn't like all this unnecessary mystery about his mentor, and he starts imagining all kinds of conspiracies. Since the entity can read your thoughts, you have to force yourself not to react to such nonsense. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, the scientists of the mustachioed man are hard at work. The criminals who used the divine blood were defeated and were shot down by the army, which is really surprising. In addition, the Black Panther is also imprisoned. The moment he hears that, the mustachioed old man becomes extremely worried. That subordinate should be dead by now. Because he knows too much, he might betray them while he's in prison. So the old man orders the scientists to speed up the plan. It's time to move to level 2 immediately. But one of the investigators says the area has not been evacuated yet. The mustachioed man doesn't care about those useless lives. A countdown begins outside. The final process has begun. A massive portal appears in the destroyed part of the city. Some nearby workers are confused. Those who got trapped inside that barrier are already dead.